Hey guys, tonight we're going to venture into a place forgotten by time, hidden deep in the woods where no one dares to go. A house dark and silent sits by a lake that no one remembers the name of. Its walls have heard things better left unsaid, and the air around it holds whispers of secrets that have been buried for decades. But tonight, we will uncover what lies behind its crumbling doors. Now, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The house by the lake was not always as it seemed. It had stood there for decades, crumbling with each passing year. Its once pristine white walls had yellowed, chipped away by years of neglect in the elements. The windows, now cracked, stood like empty eyes staring out over the murky water, a stagnant pool that seemed to stretch endlessly in the moonlight. Trees, overgrown with vines, twisted and turned around the house, as if trying to pull it back into the earth from which it came. From the moment you stepped onto the long-forgotten path leading to the house, the air felt different, heavy, oppressive. The sort of silence that hung in the air like a threat, like the stillness before a storm. If you listened closely, you could almost hear it, the faintest sound of water lapping against the shore. Or was it the house itself, settling into its own haunted slumber? A young woman named Clara had heard the rumors, of course. Everyone had. The locals talked about the house with a mixture of awe and fear, as though it held some ancient, unspoken power over them. It was the kind of place people would point to, telling their children to stay away, or perhaps laughing nervously as they talked about the strange noises that came from the lake at night. Whispers of a curse of figures seen in the windows of lights, flickering at odd hours. No one truly believed it. It was the stuff of ghost stories, tales passed down from generation to generation. But Clara was different. She wasn't afraid of ghosts. She wasn't afraid of the dark. She had grown up on stories like this, and in her mind they were just stories until she came to this town, and someone dared her to spend the night. And so, Clara found herself standing before the house by the lake, under a sky so full of stars that it felt like the world had been stitched together in an impossible pattern. She took a breath and approached the front door, her fingers trailing across the rough wooden frame. Her heart beat in her chest, not with fear, but with excitement. This was it. The beginning of something she would later tell people about over drinks with a nervous laugh. She pushed the door open. It creaked loudly, as if the house itself had been disturbed from a long, restless sleep. The scent of decay hit her almost immediately. Dust mold, the unmistakable tang of rot. The air was thick, humid, and stale, as though the house hadn't been properly aired out in years. Clara stepped inside, her footfall muffled by the thick carpet that covered the floor. The first thing she noticed was the silence. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a country home. It was something else, something unnatural. As though the house was holding its breath, waiting for something. She walked through the entryway, her eyes drawn to the faded wallpaper that peeled away from the walls in large curling strips. Every corner of the house seemed to be crumbling, but not enough to completely collapse. There was a sickly, desperate persistence to its decay, as though the house was too stubborn to simply let go. There was no sign of life, but Clara couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The house was alive in its own way, its creaking and groaning like whispers coming from deep inside its bones. She continued through the narrow hall, passing doorways that led into rooms she didn't dare enter, rooms that were too dark and too silent, as though the shadows themselves were holding secrets within. Finally, she reached the living room. A large fireplace stood at one end, cold and unused, the hearth empty, except for a scattering of old ashes. The room was lined with shelves of books, some of which appeared to be untouched for decades. Clara ran her fingers over the spines, feeling the dust accumulate beneath her fingertips. They were all old, too old. The covers were cracked and weathered, their titles nearly illegible. It was then that she noticed something strange. In the far corner, tucked behind a set of heavy curtains, was a portrait. The figure in the painting was a woman, her face pale and lifeless, her eyes too wide, too hollow. The expression on her face was one of quiet despair, like someone who had lived through too much and was finally ready to give up. The name inscribed at the bottom of the portrait was too faded to make out, but Clara could still make out a few letters. Eleanor. Clara stood frozen, her eyes fixed on the painting. Something about the woman's eyes felt wrong. It was as though they were following her, tracking her every movement. A shiver ran down her spine, but she shrugged it off. It was just a painting, she told herself. It's just a house. But deep inside, a sense of unease settled into her chest. She turned away from the portrait, looking around the room again. Something caught her eye. A faint glow coming from the far side of the room near the staircase that led up to the second floor. It was soft at first, like a flicker of light, but it grew stronger. A lantern, perhaps. Curiosity tugged at her stronger now. With cautious steps, she approached the light which flickered and danced in the otherwise dim room. As she neared the source, her pulse quickened, her breath shallow. The light was coming from beneath the floorboards. The glow was strange, an unnatural yellow-green, almost sickly. There was a trapdoor half hidden beneath a tattered rug. The light pulsed from beneath it, drawing her in. Clara kneeled down, pulling at the corner of the rug, her fingers trembling. With a forceful yank, the rug was moved, and there it was, the trapdoor. It was old, its hinges rusted, but the light coming from the crack between the boards was undeniable. She hesitated for only a moment before she reached for the handle. Clara's hand hovered over the handle, the strange light beneath the trap door drawing her in with an almost magnetic pull. Her heart thudded loudly in her chest, her pulse quickening as the room around her seemed to hold its breath. The air was thick with a sense of anticipation, as though the house itself was waiting for her to make a choice. With a steadying breath, Clara grabbed the handle, feeling the coolness of the metal beneath her fingers. She gave it a firm tug, and the door creaked open, its old hinges groaning in protest, the sound echoing through the silence like a warning. The faint glow intensified, spilling out from the narrow crack and illuminating the dusty floor around her. She hesitated for a brief moment, her mind swirling with questions and doubts. What could be down there? Should she have stayed upstairs where the house was less alive? But then curiosity overcame her. After all, she had come here to uncover the secrets of the house. This was the part of the story she had come for, the moment when the mystery became real. The trapdoor opened with a soft, reluctant sigh. Beneath it was a small, narrow staircase leading downward into the dark. The walls of the stairs were lined with old rotting wood, and the air grew colder the deeper she peered into the gloom. The light was coming from somewhere below, but the source was hidden in the darkness, flickering and shifting like a flame on the edge of the wind. Clara stood up, brushing off her knees, her hand still gripping the edge of the trapdoor. She could feel the pull of the unknown, the sensation that whatever lay beneath was waiting for her. Without another thought, she descended the stairs, the old wood creaking beneath her weight with each step. The light grew stronger, bathing her in a faint, sickly glow as she reached the bottom of the staircase. When she stepped into the small underground room, her eyes widened in disbelief. It wasn't what she had expected. The room was dimly lit by several scattered lanterns, their flames flickering weakly in the corners. The floor was covered with a thick layer of dust, but the strange, unnatural glow seemed to come from an object in the center of the room. A small, ancient-looking chest covered in symbols that Clara couldn't quite make out. The chest was resting on a pedestal, and the light seemed to emanate from it, casting long, eerie shadows on the stone walls. Clara's heart raced as she stepped closer to the chest. The air in the room grew heavier, the faint smell of dampness mingling with something metallic. The symbols carved into the chest were worn with age, as though it had been here for centuries, but they were still alive in some way, still pulsing with energy. She reached out a hand, her fingers brushing against the cold wood. A sudden jolt of energy shot through her, and she gasped, her body trembling. It was as though the chest was alive, as though it had been waiting for her to touch it. The light from the chest intensified, and the temperature of the room dropped, causing Clara to shiver. She could feel a presence behind her, something watching her, waiting. But when she turned, there was nothing. Just the empty, eerie silence of the basement. Her breath quickened as she pulled her hand back, but the pull of the chest was undeniable. She had to open it. She had come this far, and whatever was inside seemed to call to her, beckoning her to discover its secrets. With shaking hands, she placed her fingers on the chest's lid and slowly lifted it. The sound of the wood scraping against the hinges echoed in the room, and as the lid creaked open, a blast of cold air rushed out, carrying with it the faint smell of decay. Inside the chest was a collection of objects wrapped in layers of dusty cloth. She reached in carefully, her hands trembling, as she pulled out the first item, a small weathered book. Its cover was bound in faded leather, the pages yellowed with age. The symbols on the cover matched those on the chest, but this time they seemed to shimmer, shifting and changing, as though they were alive. Clara opened the book, and her eyes widened as she read the first words. The house by the lake is not just a place. It is a prison, and its keeper has long since disappeared, but his power remains. A chill ran down Clara's spine as she turned the pages, each one revealing more about the house, the lake, and the curse that bound them together. The words described how the house had been built on the foundation of ancient magic, a place where darkness was not just a force, but a living entity. The keeper, a man named Elias, had trapped the evil within the walls of the house, but it had never fully died. Instead, it had fed on the souls of those who came near, twisting them into something else. Clara's mind raced as she absorbed the knowledge the book contained. She had come here to uncover a story, but she hadn't expected this. The house wasn't just a haunted place, it was a vessel for something far darker, something that had lived for centuries and would continue to do so, feeding on anyone who dared to enter. The air in the room grew colder still, and the lanterns flickered violently, casting grotesque shadows against the walls. The sense of being watched intensified, and Clara felt a presence behind her once more. This time, however, she didn't turn around. She couldn't. The book fell open to a new page, its pages turning of their own accord, as if the book itself was urging her forward. The curse will never end. The words seemed to whisper, the letters fading as quickly as they appeared. It will only grow as long as the house stands, and the keeper is still here waiting. Clara's heart hammered in her chest. The keeper was still here. The temperature in the room dropped sharply, and Clara could see her breath in the air. The faint whisper of wind seemed to pick up, swirling through the room, carrying with it a low, echoing growl. The darkness was alive. It had been waiting for someone like Clara to open the chest to uncover the truth. And now, it was aware. A voice deep and hollow resonated from the shadows, its words barely a whisper. "You shouldn't have opened the chest." Clara froze, her blood running cold at the sound of the voice. It was a low, guttural whisper that seemed to come from all directions, reverberating through the walls and echoing in her ears. The shadows around her deepened, twisting and stretching in unnatural ways as if they were alive, creeping toward her hungry. She held her breath, her heart thundering in her chest. The book still lay open in her hands, its pages fluttering in the ghostly draft that seemed to fill the room. The temperature had dropped so much that she could see her breath cloud in front of her, and yet there was a heat, an oppressive energy pressing down on her shoulders as if the very air was alive with something sinister. The voice came again, this time clearer, though still faint, as if it were both near and far at the same time. "You shouldn't have come." Clara's throat tightened, and her hand gripped the book more firmly. She had known deep down that the house was not just some old abandoned structure. But now, as the reality of the situation set in, she wondered if she had ever truly understood the full extent of the danger she was in. A slow, heavy sound began to echo from behind her, like the soft scuff of bare feet on wood. Clara's body tensed. She couldn't bring herself to turn around, not yet. Not when every instinct screamed that whatever was behind her should remain unseen for as long as possible. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to writhe as if they were reaching out toward her, hungry and alive. A chill brushed against her neck, and she could feel the weight of unseen eyes upon her. "You should have stayed away," the voice murmured again, louder this time. "Now you're part of it. You're part of the house, and it will never let you leave." Clara's hand began to shake, but she couldn't look away from the chest, the book in her hands the only thing that had revealed even a hint of the dark truth about this place. She knew the house was ancient, cursed, bound to some unearthly force, but now it was clear. She had awakened something that had been dormant, waiting. A sudden gust of wind slammed the trapdoor shut above her, the sharp sound of wood scraping against stone reverberating through the small chamber. Clara's breath caught in her throat, and she spun around, her eyes scanning the room in panic. But there was nothing there. Still, the oppressive weight of the atmosphere grew. The darkness seemed to press in from all sides, suffocating and thick with dread. The lanterns flickered violently, casting erratic shadows that seemed to leap and twist unnaturally. The cold, now unbearable, clung to her skin, seeping into her bones, and then the footsteps, slow, deliberate, almost like they were following her. Each step echoing louder and louder in the silence of the basement. Clara's heart raced, and before she could even react, a sudden flash of light burst from the book, illuminating the room in an eerie glow. It was as if the pages were reacting to the dark presence that had stirred in the house, as though the book itself was a conduit for the force that had claimed this place. "You have awoken the keeper," the voice whispered again, now colder than before. It was everywhere inside her head, inside her very soul. It wasn't just a voice, it was a presence, a being, something far older than anything Clara had ever encountered. Suddenly, she felt an icy breath against her neck, the cold so sharp it sent a shudder through her entire body. Without thinking, she turned. Standing just beyond the flickering light of the lanterns was a figure, a tall, slender shape cloaked in shadows. Its face was obscured, but Clara could feel its presence oppressive and heavy. The air around it seemed to distort, as if reality itself were bending around it. She opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came out. She couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Her limbs were frozen in place, paralyzed by the sheer force of the figure's presence. The dark figure stepped closer, its movements impossibly slow and deliberate, as if savoring her fear. "You have opened the door," the figure's voice said, deep and resonant, more real now, like a whispering wind carried by the currents of time itself. "And now you will never leave. You belong to the house as all those before you have." Clara's legs gave way beneath her, and she collapsed to the cold stone floor, her body trembling violently. She fought to regain control of her breath, to find the courage to move. but the figure's gaze seemed to pierce her, locking her in place. The world around her faded. The only thing she could focus on was the figure in front of her, the keeper of this cursed house. The figure raised its hand, and with the motion, the shadows seemed to stretch out, reaching for Clara. Her heart pounded louder in her ears as they closed in around her, as if the very walls of the room were alive and suffocating her. "You were never meant to know." The voice echoed again, the words falling like an ancient final verdict. "You should have left when you had the chance. Now the house is yours." Clara's body was fully consumed by the shadows now. It was as though they had swallowed her whole. Her vision, clouding her senses, overwhelmed by the cold, dark presence that enveloped her. Her hands, still clutching the book, began to tremble, the pages fluttering wildly as if responding to the force surrounding her. And then in the midst of the darkness, Clara's mind raced. A fleeting thought, something in the back of her mind, an inkling of an idea. She couldn't stop it, but she could fight. She had to fight. But was it too late? "The house has claimed you," the figure whispered, "and now it will never let you go." The shadows closed in around Clara, their cold, unforgiving tendrils tightening like a vice. Her body felt as though it were being pulled into the very walls of the room, swallowed by the darkness that oozed from every corner. The book in her hands trembled violently, its pages flickering as if the ancient text were trying to escape its own bindings. A low, guttural hum emanated from the pages, an unsettling sound that seemed to vibrate through her bones. But despite the paralyzing terror flooding her body, Clara's mind screamed with a single desperate thought. No. Not like this. Not yet. Her eyes darted to the book, and in the brief moment of clarity, something strange happened. The energy in the room shifted, as if the book recognized her will, her determination not to be consumed. The flickering light from the lanterns pulsed, casting long, jagged shadows that stretched like fingers across the stone floor. With all the strength she could muster, Clara raised the book, its weight suddenly heavier than before. She opened it once more, her hands trembling, and the symbols on the pages seemed to glow faintly. The air around her seemed to hum with ancient power, and the oppressive cold that surrounded her seemed to hesitate, as if something within the book was resisting it. The figure the keeper stood still, watching her, its presence overwhelming and suffocating. Its dark form remained a shadow, indistinct, its face hidden, but Clara could feel its cold gaze upon her. A deep, unspoken understanding passed between them. This was not merely a house. It was alive, its dark heart pulsing with malice and intent, and she had awoken it. But the book was something else. It was the key, a thread of light in the suffocating dark. She clung to it, her fingers finding their place on the open pages. With a whisper that barely escaped her lips, Clara began to read the words aloud. The language was foreign, ancient, and the sound of it felt unnatural, like an incantation not meant for human ears. But still, she spoke, her voice trembling but determined. "By the darkness you seek to bind, and the shadows you choose to defy, I call upon the light that dwells beyond. Set me free from the chains of your curse, and let me break your grip." The moment the words left her mouth, the temperature in the room dropped even further, the shadows recoiling as if burned by the very utterance. The lanterns flickered violently, casting eerie, disjointed shapes on the walls. The air was thick with energy, swirling around her in a vortex, tugging at her clothes, at her hair, at her very soul. The keeper let out a low growl, the sound reverberating through the room, vibrating the very foundation of the house. It was the sound of fury, of frustration, as though it could feel the power of the book fighting back against it. "Fool!" The keeper hissed, its voice a rasping whisper that filled Clara's ears. You cannot escape what you have awakened. The darkness is eternal. It will devour you. The house will claim you as it claimed all the others before you. But Clara's eyes were locked on the book, now her hands gripping the pages with a strength she didn't know she had. The words she had spoken were only the beginning, and the more she recited, the more the darkness seemed to falter, shifting uneasily in the room. A bright, sharp flash of light erupted from the book, blinding her for a moment. The force of it threw her back, and she fell to the cold stone floor, the book slipping from her grasp. But even as she lay there stunned and disoriented, the light continued to pulse, growing brighter, pushing back against the shadows. The keeper, which had been looming over her, now recoiled. Its form twisted and writhed the shadows around it, churning as if in agony. Clara could feel the darkness retreating, being pushed back by the light that was growing stronger with each passing second. The ground beneath her trembled, and she forced herself to sit up, her hands finding the book once more. The words were still there, etched in the pages, and she knew deep down that she had to finish what she had started. Clara's voice, steady, now rose once again in the ancient language. I reject your chains. I defy your will. You will not control me. Not anymore. The shadows screamed a deep, blood-curdling howl that seemed to reverberate through the very walls of the house. The keeper's form wavered, its shape flickering in and out of focus, as though it was fighting to hold itself together. You cannot win. The keeper snarled, its voice breaking with a kind of desperation. The house is mine. The darkness is mine. You will never escape. Clara took a deep breath, her hands shaking, but her resolve stronger than ever. She raised the book high above her head, and as she did, the light from the pages exploded outward, filling the room with a blinding brilliance. The walls seemed to shake, and the floor beneath her buckled, as if the house itself were being torn apart. The keeper screamed again, its form unraveling, twisting into a mass of shadows that seemed to tear apart as the light from the book consumed it. The room darkened, the sounds of the battle fading into silence, and then, as suddenly as it had begun, the light dimmed. The shadows were gone. The air was still, the oppressive weight lifted, and Clara was left alone in the quiet. Her body shook with the aftermath of the confrontation, but the house, the curse, was gone. The silence that had once been so suffocating now felt peaceful. Clara stood slowly, her legs unsteady, but the room was no longer threatening. The dark figure was no more. She had broken the cycle. The house by the lake, with its terrible secrets, was no longer a prison. But as Clara stood there, her eyes scanning the empty room, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching her. She didn't know what would come next, or what other truths the house had hidden from her. But one thing was clear. The darkness had not claimed her, and as she stepped toward the door, the faintest whisper lingered in the air. The house will never truly be empty. Clara froze, her hand resting on the doorknob as the whisper echoed through the room, settling deep into her bones. The air, once thick with an oppressive darkness, now felt eerily still. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a fleeting moment she wondered if she had truly won. The house, though silent, now felt more alive than ever before, as if the very walls were watching her every movement. The whisper had been so faint, so almost imperceptible, but Clara heard it clearly. The house would never truly be empty. She glanced back at the room. The walls, once shrouded in shadow, now stood in quiet desolation. The lanterns flickered dimly, their faint glow barely illuminating the room's broken furniture. The chest, still open, sat at the center of the room, its contents now untouched. The book she had used to banish the darkness was lying on the ground next to her, its pages fluttering in a soft breeze that seemed to come from nowhere. Clara's mind raced. What did the voice mean? Had she truly destroyed the curse? Or was the house, the keeper, still lingering, waiting for her to make a mistake? She didn't have all the answers, but one thing was clear. She couldn't leave yet, not until she understood the truth. With a deep breath, Clara crossed the room and picked up the book. Its leather cover felt strangely warm against her skin, as if it were pulsing with some kind of energy. She opened the pages again, her eyes scanning the symbols. There was something here she had missed. The words that had freed her from the house's grasp were not just words. They were a key. But to what? A sudden sharp noise startled her, a loud bang coming from upstairs. Clara's body tensed, her heart skipping a beat. The house was still awake, still waiting. The floorboards creaked under the weight of something heavy. Footsteps, slow, methodical. It was as if something or someone was moving through the house. She wasn't alone anymore. Clara's breath quickened. The walls, which had once felt so still, now seemed to pulse with life, as if they were breathing. The temperature in the room dropped once again, the chill biting at her skin. But this time, there was no light to push back the shadows. The house, it seemed, had changed in the wake of the battle. The force that had been banished was not gone completely. The footsteps continued drawing closer, echoing in the silence. Clara's hands gripped the book tightly, her eyes darting to the stairway, the only way out. She wasn't sure what was coming for her, but she knew one thing: she had to face it. She couldn't leave until she understood everything. "Who's there?" She called out, her voice shaking, but it was all she could muster. The only sound that broke the suffocating silence. No answer, only the creaking of the house. The steps stopped at the top of the stairs. Clara's mind raced. She had already confronted the darkness and it had receded. But this was different. The air had changed again, the very foundation of the house seeming to shift. The room, once a place of oppressive fear, now seemed to hold something else. Something more. The whisper had told her that the house would never be empty. What did that mean? Was it the house itself that still lived? Was it a part of the evil that had once haunted it? Her heart pounded as she slowly made her way toward the stairs, the book still clutched in her hands. The footsteps above her were still, but she could feel them, an unseen presence standing at the top, waiting. The quiet that enveloped her was unbearable, as though even the walls had gone silent in anticipation. She reached the bottom of the staircase and looked up, but the darkness above was thick. She could barely make out the outline of the second floor, and yet there was something there. A shape, faint, but it was moving just out of reach of the dim light from the lantern. Slowly, she ascended the stairs, each step creaking under her weight. The darkness above seemed to close in on her, but she forced herself to keep moving forward. The footsteps had stopped, but the air was thick with the presence of something. She reached the top, and the moment she stepped into the hallway, the temperature dropped even further. Clara's breath fogged in the air as she stepped cautiously forward, her senses alert. Every door was closed, every window covered, but there was a presence in each of these rooms, waiting, watching, and then she felt it. The unmistakable sensation of eyes on her. She turned quickly toward the nearest door, her heart racing. Without thinking, she reached for the doorknob and swung it open. Inside the room was empty. Only an old bed and a few broken pieces of furniture remained draped in dust and cobwebs. The air inside was stale, but nothing moved. Clara's pulse slowed as she stepped inside, her eyes searching every corner. She let out a sigh of relief, but as her gaze drifted to the corner of the room, she froze. There, lying on the floor, was a newspaper. The edges were frayed and yellowed with age, the print barely legible. She bent down, heart pounding again as she picked it up. The headline was faded, but the words were still clear enough. "The keeper has returned. Clara's breath caught in her throat. The headline was dated only a few weeks ago. How this was impossible. The keeper was gone, destroyed. Wasn't it? Her fingers trembled as she turned the page, revealing the rest of the article. The details were muddled, but the last line jumped out at her. The house by the lake will always have a keeper, and it will never be empty. The curse lives on, hidden in the shadows. Clara stood frozen in place, her thoughts swirling. The keeper wasn't gone. The curse had only been momentarily subdued, and now the house was reclaiming its hold. She wasn't free. She had never been free. As the darkness around her seemed to swell, the whisper came again, louder this time. It will never let you go. The whispering voice cut through the thick air like a blade, each syllable carrying with it the weight of the house's ancient curse. Clara's hand trembled, gripping the newspaper tightly as the last of its chilling words rang in her ears. The curse had not been broken. It had only been delayed. The house, the keeper, they were still here, alive and waiting. Clara's heart thudded in her chest as she looked around the room, the air growing heavier by the second. The shadows seemed to shift in the corners of her vision, as though something was moving just out of sight. But when she turned, nothing was there. She stood frozen in the doorway, the chill creeping into her bones as if the walls themselves were closing in. Her pulse quickened. The house was alive. It was feeding on her fear, her confusion. It wanted her to feel helpless, to give in to the suffocating darkness that had been hanging over her since the moment she stepped inside. She couldn't stay here. She couldn't let it win. With a shaky breath, Clara turned away from the room, her eyes scanning the hallway. The footsteps had stopped, but the feeling of being watched hadn't. She could sense it, feel it lurking just out of reach, waiting for the right moment to strike. But Clara wasn't going to let herself be consumed by it again. She had fought too hard, faced too many horrors to turn back now. She was so close. She had to find the truth, the real truth, before it was too late. Her footsteps were heavy as she moved down the hallway, the eerie silence wrapping around her like a blanket. Every door she passed seemed to whisper her name, beckoning her to look inside to uncover the secrets that had been hidden for so long. But Clara didn't stop. She couldn't afford to be distracted. She had to keep moving. Finally, at the end of the hallway, she reached a door, one that had caught her attention earlier, but one she had purposely avoided. It was larger than the others, imposing, almost like it didn't belong. The wood was dark and smooth, the handle ornate, but something about it felt wrong. Clara hesitated, her fingers hovering just above the door's brass handle. She could feel it again, the pull of something ancient, something that wanted her to enter. But it wasn't just curiosity driving her now. It was fear. The house had already claimed too much, and she couldn't let it take any more. With a deep breath, Clara turned the handle and pushed the door open. The room was vast, darker than the others, its walls lined with shelves filled with old books, strange artifacts, and dusty relics. But it wasn't the room that caused Clara's breath to catch in her throat. It was the figure standing in the center of it, a man. The figure was tall, his back turned toward her, but Clara could feel his presence. He stood motionless, a silhouette against the dim glow of the room, his shape shrouded in shadow. His hair was long and unkempt, his clothes old and tattered. He wore a long coat, dark, and weathered, his hands resting at his sides, fingers twitching slightly, as if he were waiting for something. Clara's stomach twisted into a knot. She couldn't breathe, couldn't move. This was the keeper. She could feel it in her bones. The man who had watched over the house for centuries. The one whose curse had been passed down through the ages, whose very existence was bound to the house itself. The man turned slowly, his eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. His face was pale, gaunt, with sharp features that seemed to stare into her soul. His eyes, those cold, unblinking eyes, pierced through her with a look of knowing, as if he had been waiting for her all this time. "Clara?" He said, his voice low and gravelly, like the rustling of dry leaves in the wind. "You shouldn't have come. You are too late." Clara's heart hammered in her chest, but she couldn't bring herself to speak. She was frozen, caught in the gaze of the keeper, as if his very presence paralyzed her. He took a slow step forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "The house has claimed you, just as it has claimed all those before you. And now, you are its servant, bound by the curse that has been passed down through the ages." "No," Clara managed to whisper, shaking her head. I stopped you. The book. The light, it should have ended the curse. You're gone. This house is free." The keeper's lips curled into a twisted smile, though there was no warmth in it. "You have no understanding of what you've done, child. The house cannot be freed. It was never meant to be. It was built on darkness, bound by it, and it will always seek to reclaim those who disturb its rest." Clara's hands shook as she gripped the book tighter, her fingers digging into its worn pages. "I won't let you take me. Not again." The keeper's smile faded, his expression darkening. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "It is not about taking you, Clara. You are already mine. The darkness will always have you. It will feed on your fear. And once it is done with you, it will move on to the next." Clara took a step back, her heart pounding in her chest. "I won't be your victim," she said, her voice shaking, but determined. "I've already faced you. I've fought you. And I'm not going to let you win." The keeper's eyes narrowed, his face twisting with anger. "You cannot fight what you are bound to. You have opened the door, and now there is no escaping what lies behind it." Clara's mind raced. She couldn't let this be the end. She had to find a way out, to break the curse once and for all. She couldn't let this house claim her, just as it had claimed the others. With a surge of adrenaline, she ran toward the door, the book still clutched tightly in her hands. But before she could reach the threshold, a shadow shot out from the walls, wrapping around her like a vice. She gasped, struggling against the dark tendrils that held her in place. And then the voice came again, but this time it was not the keeper's. It was something else. Something older. Clara's body jerked against the shadowy tendrils that coiled around her, pulling her back into the room with terrifying force. The darkness gripped her like a tightening noose, wrapping around her limbs, locking her in place. She could feel its cold seeping into her skin, filling her veins with icy dread. Her breath quickened, her heart thundering in her chest, as the shadow continued to pull her toward the center of the room. For a moment, all she could do was struggle, her mind racing as she fought against the force that held her captive. The book in her hands felt strangely warm, almost like it was pulsing with its own life, as if it were aware of what was happening. And then she remembered the words, the incantation that had driven back the darkness before. "You cannot escape," the voice echoed again, deeper now, and far more unsettling. "You are mine, as all who came before you were." Clara's vision blurred, the edges of her sight darkening, as if the room itself were folding in on her. She could see the keeper's face in front of her again, his pale, twisted features sneering at her in the dim light. The faint glow of the book casting strange shadows on his hollowed-out face. He moved closer, his presence suffocating, pushing against her like a physical weight. "No," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible against the weight of the room. "I will not belong to you." Her hands were shaking, but her fingers tightened around the book. She couldn't stop now, not when she had come so far. There was still a chance, still a thread of hope. She focused on the book, its pages flipping on their own, as if it were urging her forward. She remembered the symbols, the language she had spoken before, and with a deep breath, she forced the words out again. The voice trembled at first, barely a whisper against the suffocating pressure. But then it grew stronger, more confident. By the darkness you seek to bind, by the shadows you choose to defy, I call upon the light that dwells beyond. Set me free from the chains of your curse. Let me break your hold. The air around her began to shift. The shadows that had gripped her slowly started to loosen the cold tendrils, retreating just enough for her to breathe again. But the keeper was not finished. His eyes blazed with anger, and he hissed, stepping toward her with purpose. You think you can destroy what is ancient, what is eternal. His voice was like ice scraping against stone. You are but a fleeting spark in the dark, a candle that will burn out before the night ends. The darkness began to swell again, and Clara felt the air grow heavier, the temperature plummeting once more. But this time, she wasn't alone. As the words from the book left her lips, the shadows around her began to tremble. The walls, the floor, everything in the room felt as though it were shifting, responding to her will. She could feel something stirring within her, something deep inside, something she had never known she possessed. A bright light flared, and this time Clara wasn't just reacting to the darkness. She was fighting it. The book in her hands began to hum the symbols on the pages, glowing with an ethereal light. The room around her twisted and warped, as if the very fabric of reality was unraveling in response to the power she was calling upon. The keeper snarled his shadowy form, writhing as though it were trying to fight the light that emanated from the book. You cannot banish me, he spat. The house is mine, and so are you. But Clara's voice grew stronger as she recited the incantation again, louder this time, her will more determined. The light from the book intensified, filling the room with a radiant glow that pushed back the shadows with force. I reject your chains. I reject your power. I am free, and you will never control me again. The keeper's face twisted in fury as the light consumed him. His form writhed his body, dissipating into the air like smoke being blown away by the wind. The walls shook the ground beneath Clara's feet, trembling as though the house itself were fighting back, but the light from the book was too strong. The shadows that had once held her captive were now dissipating, vanishing like dust in the wind. The keeper was gone. For a moment, Clara stood there, gasping for air, the book still glowing in her hands. The oppressive weight in the room lifted the temperature, slowly returning to normal. The house, once filled with darkness and malice, now felt still peaceful, even like it had finally exhaled a long-held breath. But Clara knew it wasn't over. Not entirely. The house had been sealed, but its power, its evil, was still tied to the land, to the lake, to the very earth beneath her feet. The keeper was gone, yes, but the house still had a life of its own. She dropped to her knees, the book falling from her hands as exhaustion washed over her. She was trembling, her body drained from the energy it had taken to face the darkness. The faint glow from the book dimmed the last of its light, flickering out, like a candle being snuffed by the wind. But before she could fully catch her breath, a sound broke the silence, faint at first, but unmistakable. A voice. Clara froze, her body tensing as the hair on the back of her neck stood up. The voice was low, almost a whisper, and it came from somewhere within the house. It wasn't the keeper's voice, but it carried the same weight, the same hunger. You cannot escape. Clara's heart skipped a beat, her body frozen in place as the whisper lingered in the air, hanging like a shadow that refused to dissipate. The words were simple, but the power behind them was suffocating. She could feel the weight of them pressing down on her chest, like the very air around her had thickened, turned dense with malevolent intent. You cannot escape. The voice repeated softer this time, but it was no less unsettling. It was coming from somewhere deep within the house, but not from a specific direction, no. It seemed to come from the very walls themselves, as though the house had become one living, breathing entity, and its whispers were seeping from the cracks. Clara's breath caught in her throat as her eyes darted around the room, but everything remained still. The shadows no longer crept and shifted. The light from the lanterns flickered, but they offered no answers. There was no figure in the corners, no ominous presence lurking in the periphery. Only the voice. It was then that Clara realized the house had been more than a mere structure. It had been a prison. Yes, but for what? Was it the keeper's power, as the book had suggested? Or something else? Something even darker. She staggered to her feet, her legs weak beneath her, but the fear in her heart was enough to keep her moving. She had come this far, faced the darkness, and won. But at what cost? The house wasn't just a place. It was alive, and it was holding its breath, waiting for her to make a mistake. The floor beneath her creaked with each step she took, and Clara's eyes once again scanned the room. No, the house. She wasn't just a visitor now. She was part of it, bound to it. The realization hit her like a cold gust of wind she would never truly leave. The house had already claimed her. The voice came again clearer this time, as if it were standing right behind her. You have opened the door, and now you belong to us. You cannot leave. Clara spun around, panic bubbling in her chest. But there was no one there. No figure. No movement. Just the oppressive stillness of the house, the faintest whispers still echoing from the walls. She pressed her palms against her ears, trying to block it out, but the voice wasn't in her head. It was in the house. Her fingers brushed the edges of the book that lay on the ground, the only thing that had offered her any semblance of strength in the face of this darkness. As she reached for it, a single thought bubbled to the surface. This wasn't over. The house wasn't just haunted. It was alive with something older, something primal that had outlived the keeper, and whatever curses had once been placed upon it. The book lay there, its cover cracked, its pages worn with time. She picked it up, her hand trembling as she flipped through the pages again. Her eyes quickly scanned the symbols, trying to find the missing piece, the final step that would free her from this nightmare. She had to know what was left, what she was missing. And then in the back of the book she saw it, a symbol she hadn't noticed before. A symbol that was not like the others. It was darker, deeper, and as soon as her eyes fell on it, something inside her twisted. She didn't need to understand the meaning. She could feel it. The symbol was a seal, a binding. It was the final part of the curse, the very thing that held the house together. It was the heart of the darkness, and Clara had unlocked it. As she stood there, staring at the symbol, the house around her began to tremble. The walls groaned and shifted, the floorboards creaking, as if the very structure of the house were alive, reacting to the words and symbols in the book. The air around her thickened, and the shadows in the corners of the room grew longer, stretching toward her like twisted fingers. She could hear the whispering now, clearer than ever. It was no longer just a voice. It was a chorus, a low, resonant hum that filled the entire room. You cannot undo what has been done. The house is yours. Clara clutched the book tighter, her knuckles white, as the weight of the house pressed down on her. She couldn't just leave it like this. She had come too far, fought too hard. She had to destroy it, destroy whatever was holding the house together. But how? What could she do when the very house itself had become the enemy? She turned back toward the doorway, half expecting to see the keeper standing there, but there was nothing. Just empty air, cold and empty. The house had already claimed him, it seemed. The keeper was no more. But his legacy, the curse, lingered, The whispering rose in volume, overwhelming her senses, each word dripping with malice. It wasn't just the house that spoke now. It was everything around her. The air itself seemed to warp, and the walls stretched outward, as if closing in on her, trapping her. "You are ours," the voices murmured, growing louder and louder until they were deafening. "The house will never let you go. The curse is yours." Desperation flooded Clara's mind as she dropped to her knees. She couldn't breathe. The house was choking her, its darkness consuming every inch of her being. She felt the pull of the shadows, the cold fingers of the curse tightening around her soul. And then, through the chaos and the overwhelming darkness, a thought broke through the symbol in the book. It was the key. She had to use it to break the curse, to destroy the house once and for all. With trembling hands, Clara opened the book once more, her eyes racing across the pages. The symbol was there, waiting for her. She traced it with her finger, trying to focus through the darkness that threatened to consume her. It was a seal, something that had been created to trap the house, to trap the darkness. She had to break it. But how? A voice whispered inside her mind. Not the house, but her own voice. A memory from before she had come here. Light. The word came to her like a flash of understanding, a spark in the dark. Light. It was the only way to defeat the shadows. It was the one thing the darkness could not survive. Her hand shook as she placed her fingers on the symbol in the book, and for the first time the house stilled. Everything around her went silent. The shadows stopped creeping. The air felt still, like the world was holding its breath. Clara closed her eyes, and with every ounce of strength she had left, she focused on the light. She focused on the power of the book, the power she had felt before. And then she spoke the words aloud, louder this time, with all the strength she could muster. "By the light I break your hold. By the light I cast you out." The book glowed and the room shuddered. The room quaked beneath Clara's feet as the light from the book flared bright, its glow filling every inch of the space, pushing back the oppressive darkness that had once consumed it. It wasn't just light, it was pure energy, raw and powerful, radiating from the depths of the book, as though it had been waiting for this moment to come alive. Clara could feel the power surge through her, a sharp, invigorating force that surged from the book into her very core. Her hands trembled, but she held fast, her fingers tracing the glowing symbol on the pages. The darkness, once so suffocating, began to recoil, twisting and writhing, as though it were burning under the light's relentless touch. The house seemed to groan its very foundation, shuddering as the ancient malevolent force that had held it together for so long began to unravel. The walls trembled, the floorboards cracked, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with the raw power of the light. The shadows that had once filled the corners, hiding the house's twisted secrets, began to bleed away like smoke, dissipating into the air, as if they had never existed. Clara's breath came in quick gasps as she stood, her heart racing, the light growing brighter with each passing moment. The whispers that had tormented her now sounded distant, faint, like a dying echo. But still, something tugged at her, pulling at her awareness, telling her that this wasn't over. The house was fighting back, not with force, but with intensity, an intensity that matched the power she was wielding. "You cannot destroy me." The voice, now distorted, echoed through the walls, the floor beneath her feet trembling in response. It was the keeper's voice, but it was distorted now, as if it were both far away and too close at the same time. The light flickered in response, but Clara pressed on her voice, unwavering. "I can. You are no longer the keeper. This house is not yours to control." The air around her crackled with energy, and she could feel the presence of the house like a malevolent force trying to push against her. The warmth from the light surged through her, but there was a coldness in the room now, a chill creeping along the edges of her skin, trying to find its way back. She clutched the book harder, her mind focusing, drowning out the rising chaos around her. She had to finish this. She had to end it. The house had claimed too many lives, consumed too many souls. But Clara would not be one of them. The shadows hissed, retreating further into the corners, but Clara knew the battle wasn't won yet. The keeper's voice, no longer the calm whisper it had been, was now a growl, low and filled with rage. You think you can erase me? You think you can undo what has been done for centuries? The house lives because I made it live. It is bound to me, and I will never let it go. The walls around her seemed to pulse in time, with the voice their dark shapes shifting and twisting. It was as if the house itself was alive, trying to fight the light. The air felt thicker, colder again, and Clara could hear the faint sound of something crawling beneath the floorboards, scraping against the wood. Her pulse raced. The book's light flickered once more, dimming, before growing even brighter than before, pushing back the shadows and forcing the room to bend. The house seemed to shudder, as if it were on the brink of collapse. The book, her last hope, was draining her energy, but Clara wouldn't stop. She couldn't. You will never leave. The keeper's voice was almost triumphant now, but Clara refused to listen. Her body was weak, her hands trembling from the strain, but she knew she had to finish the ritual. The words, the incantation, the light. She took a deep breath and spoke the final words, her voice shaking, but determined. By the light that binds us all, I break the seal, I sever the chains. The darkness is gone. The book in her hands flared one last time, its light blinding in its intensity. The house screamed the walls, bending the shadows, twisting and screeching in protest. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze, the air thick with the violent force of their collision. And then, with a sudden crack, the house shuddered violently. The ground beneath her feet trembled, and the walls which had stood so strong for so long seemed to groan under the pressure. The light from the book burst outward in a brilliant explosion, washing over every surface, every shadow, every corner of the room. Clara shielded her eyes from the blinding light, her body pressed against the force of it. The book's glow intensified, and for a heartbeat, the entire house was engulfed in it. And then, as suddenly as it had come, the light began to fade. Clara gasped, blinking rapidly as the glow around her slowly dimmed. The room was still, silent. The house, the curse, had been broken. Clara opened her eyes and looked around. The walls, once dark and oppressive, now appeared to be normal, weathered by time, but no longer filled with the malevolent force that had plagued her. The shadows were gone. The house was no longer alive, but Clara didn't feel entirely at ease. She could feel something lingering, an echo of the darkness still hanging in the air. She knew that the house had been destroyed in the most important way, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something not quite finished. She looked down at the book in her hands, now faintly glowing with a soft, steady light. It had gone from blinding brilliance to this calm, reassuring glow. But she knew it wasn't over. The house had been freed, but the darkness, whatever it was, hadn't entirely been vanquished. It had merely been delayed, hidden beneath layers of time, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Clara knew what she had to do. The house, the keeper, the curse. It was all part of something bigger, something that had yet to be fully understood. The light from the book flickered once more, like the faintest spark of something growing still in the darkness, and Clara knew she would have to find it before it found her again. Clara stood there, the book still warm in her hands, its glow soft but insistent. The air around her was quiet now, almost unnervingly so. The oppressive weight of the darkness had lifted, but a sense of unease settled in its place, as though something vital had been left unfinished. The house, for all its malevolent history, was now a hollow shell, its twisted presence no longer suffocating her. But as she stood in the center of the room, a lingering feeling gnawed at the back of her mind. The house was free, but at what cost? Was the curse truly broken? Or had she merely suppressed it for a time? She needed answers, but the book in her hands was growing colder, its light dimming by the second. Clara knew that she couldn't remain here forever. The house had once been a place of unimaginable horrors, a prison for things older than time itself. But now that she had unlocked its secrets, she realized there was more to this place than just the keeper, more than just the curse. The thought gnawed at her. The darkness was not gone, only hidden. The floorboards creaked beneath her as she took a hesitant step toward the doorway. It felt odd wrong. The oppressive silence, once broken by the growling and screeching of the house's twisted soul, had now returned, but it was not peaceful. It was as if the house was simply holding its breath, waiting. The hallway was unchanged, the shadows that had once held dark secrets now receding to the edges. But Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. Something was waiting. With a deep breath, she stepped out into the hallway, the weight of the book still heavy in her hands. She didn't know what she was looking for, but she couldn't leave without understanding. The house had taken so much, her sanity, her strength, and now the price of that victory felt like it was just out of reach. Her footsteps echoed as she moved down the hallway, passing rooms she had yet to explore, their doors slightly ajar as if the house was calling to her. The whispers were gone, but Clara felt the pull of the darkness all around her. She could feel it in the floor beneath her and the walls that seemed to breathe with a life of their own. The light from the book flickered again, briefly brightening before dimming to an almost imperceptible glow. Clara looked down at it, her fingers trembling as she felt the weight of the curse, the weight of the house pressing against her chest. There was no escaping it. It had become part of her. Suddenly, a noise broke the silence, a soft creak, then another louder, and then the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Clara's heart skipped a beat, her breath catching in her throat. She froze, straining to listen. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, as if someone or something was moving through the house, coming closer. But there was no one there. She was alone, wasn't she? Her fingers tightened around the book, and without thinking, she started moving toward the source of the noise. She had to know. Whatever it was, whatever had been waiting for her, she couldn't leave without understanding it. As she neared the staircase leading to the upper floors, the footsteps grew louder, closer, until they seemed to surround her. The cold air returned, swirling around her like an invisible storm. Clara looked up to see a faint glow from above, far off in the distance, at the top of the stairs. The glow flickered like a candlelight, casting long shadows across the walls. She stepped forward, each step heavier than the last. Her heart raced in her chest, her mind scrambling to make sense of the situation. The house was no longer alive in the way it had been before, but it wasn't empty. She could feel it. There was something up there, something that still called to her, that still needed her to finish what had been started. The light above pulsed again, and Clara, almost without thinking, began to ascend the staircase. Each step creaked beneath her, the sound echoing in the stillness, as though the house was groaning beneath the weight of her presence. The air around her felt thick, as though the very atmosphere had become heavier, pressing down on her with the secrets of the past. She reached the top of the stairs and found herself standing in front of a door she had never noticed before. It was small, almost hidden behind a pile of broken furniture and dust. The door itself was old, but the wood was smooth, almost untouched by the decay that plagued the rest of the house. There were no marks, no signs of age, and no symbols like the ones in the other rooms. This door was different. Clara's fingers trembled as she reached for the handle, the cool metal sending a shiver up her spine. She turned it slowly, the door creaking open with a low groan. The room inside was small, barely furnished, but in the center of the room was a pedestal, and on that pedestal, a single object, a glass sphere. It sat there, bathed in the faint light from above its surface, smooth and unbroken. It shimmered with an unnatural light, casting an eerie glow around the room. Clara stepped inside the floorboards, creaking beneath her as she approached the pedestal. She didn't know why, but something about the sphere called to her. The book in her hands seemed to grow heavier as she drew closer, and for a moment, Clara hesitated. The house had already taken so much from her. What more could she possibly lose? And yet she found herself reaching out her fingers, brushing the surface of the glass. The moment she touched it, the room seemed to darken. The walls shuddered, as if the house were alive again, the air thickening with tension. Clara pulled her hand back quickly, but the glass sphere began to glow more brightly, casting sharp shadows that seemed to stretch toward her. The house trembled beneath her feet, and for the first time, Clara felt true fear course through her veins. The whispers returned louder this time, almost deafening. "It's not over." The whispers grew louder, each word like a pulse beating in her ears, rattling the very core of her being. The air around Clara seemed to vibrate with the sinister energy that emanated from the glowing glass sphere. Her body stiffened as she stepped back, her mind screaming for her to leave to get out of this place before the house claimed her again. But she couldn't move. Her feet felt rooted to the spot, her body frozen in place as the whispers became a chorus of voices rising and falling in an unsettling rhythm. "You cannot escape. The house is yours. You are bound to it forever." The sphere on the pedestal flickered, once its glow flickering like a heartbeat, steady and relentless. Clara's pulse raced in her ears, her breaths shallow and panicked, as the very walls of the house seemed to close in around her. She could feel the weight of it, the pressure of the curse, the darkness pressing down on her, suffocating her. Her fingers still hovered inches away from the sphere, as if it were pulling her closer, like a moth to a flame. She wanted to look away, to run, but her gaze was fixed on it. Her mind screamed for her to leave, but her body wouldn't obey. And then it happened. The glass sphere began to tremble on the pedestal, a faint cracking sound breaking the silence. Clara's breath caught in her throat. A hairline fracture appeared on its surface, spreading like veins through the glass, glowing with an otherworldly light. The shadows in the room seemed to move, swirling around the pedestal, coiling toward her like snakes. The air was thick, heavy, pulsing with a presence that was almost tangible. Suddenly, the sphere shattered. A sharp sound echoed through the room, like glass breaking in the quietest of moments, but much louder than it should have been. A flash of blinding light filled the room as the shards of glass scattered across the floor, falling like droplets of molten fire. Clara cried out, stumbling back, her body reacting to the intense light. And then silence. Clara blinked rapidly, her vision blurry as the bright flash faded, but what she saw left her breathless. The room was no longer the same. The walls had shifted, warped, becoming darker, as if the very structure of the house had changed in that instant. The light from above dimmed, casting harsh shadows that stretched toward her like reaching hands. The ground beneath her feet trembled, and a chill spread through the air, colder than anything she had felt before. And there, standing in the center of the room where the pedestal had been, was a figure. It wasn't the keeper. It wasn't the shadowy presence she had fought before. No, this figure was different. More ancient, more powerful, as if it had been waiting for this moment, waiting for the sphere to shatter and for the curse to fully awaken. It was tall, cloaked in dark, tattered robes that seemed to ripple with the shifting shadows, and its face was obscured, hidden behind a veil of darkness. Its presence was like a weight on the air pressing down on Clara with an intensity that left her gasping for breath. She didn't move. She couldn't. Her body was frozen in place once again, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. This thing in front of her was no mere figure. It was something older, something beyond the keeper, beyond the curse that had held the house in its grip for so long. The figure took a slow, deliberate step forward, its presence consuming the room. Its movements were fluid, unnatural, like it was gliding, shifting in and out of the shadows. "You have broken the seal." It said, its voice low and gravelly, like the sound of ancient stone grinding together. It didn't sound like a voice, but more like the very essence of the house speaking through it. "You have freed me, and now you will see what has been waiting." Clara's pulse raced, her heart thumping wildly in her chest as she tried to move to run. But the force of the figure's presence held her in place, paralyzed by a fear deeper than anything she had ever known. Her mind screamed at her to leave, to escape, but her body refused to obey. "You were never meant to come here." The figure continued, its voice growing louder, more ominous. The house was never meant to be freed. It was never meant to be broken. Clara's eyes darted around the room, but the walls seemed to close in tighter, the shadows growing longer and darker with each passing second. The figure took another step toward her, and this time, Clara could feel the pull, a strange force drawing her closer. It was as if the darkness itself was inviting her, beckoning her to step into its grasp. Her body was still frozen, but her mind was racing. What had she done? The sphere, the seal, it had shattered, and with it, she had awakened something far more dangerous than the keeper. Something that had been locked away for centuries. "The house will never be free." The figure whispered, its voice echoing inside her mind. "The curse is eternal. The darkness cannot be destroyed. It will always return, always rise." The walls seemed to shift again, the shadows growing more menacing, coiling around the edges of the room like tendrils reaching toward Clara, wrapping around her, suffocating her. And then, in a final horrifying realization, Clara understood what the figure had meant. The house was not just haunted by a curse. The house was the curse. It was the keeper. It had always been. The darkness wasn't just in the walls, it was in the very foundation of the house, in its bones, in its essence. And she had broken the seal. She had unleashed it. The figure stepped closer, the darkness enveloping her, the air thickening with every breath she took. And with a single final movement, the figure raised its hand. "You will be part of the house forever." The darkness closed in. Clara's heart pounded in her chest, the rhythm erratic, frantic. She could feel the figure's presence drawing nearer, its shadow, swallowing the light that once filled the room. The house, once merely a structure, now seemed to pulse with its own life, breathing, living, and feeding off her fear. The walls closed in the very air around her, thickening with an oppressive weight that dragged her deeper into its suffocating grasp. The darkness, which had once seemed like an external force, now felt personal. It was a part of her, winding its cold fingers through her memories, tugging at her soul. The floor beneath her feet seemed to shift, and the room spun with an eerie, unsettling force, as if the house itself was distorting reality to trap her inside. Her fingers, still clutching the book, trembled violently as the weight of the moment began to sink in. The house wasn't just cursed, it was the curse. It had been alive all along, an entity that had been feeding on the souls of those foolish enough to enter its domain. She had shattered the seal, yes, but now it was clear. There was no defeating this darkness. It wasn't something that could be simply destroyed. It was something that had existed for as long as the house itself. The figure, the one that had emerged from the shadows, was no longer a distant, ghostly presence. It was real. Its outline had solidified, no longer a mere wisp of darkness, but a tall, imposing figure, its robe shimmering with a strange, unnatural light. The long, tattered fabric rippled in the air like the surface of water, its edges glowing faintly with a ghostly hue. Clara's breath hitched in her throat as she realized the figure wasn't just standing in front of her. It was growing, becoming larger with each passing second. Its face remained hidden, obscured by the folds of its dark hood, but she could feel its eyes. Cold, piercing judging. "You should not have come here, Clara." The voice echoed its tone deep and resonant, as if it was coming from all around her, seeping into her mind. "The house has always been mine, and now you are mine as well." A cold wave of dread washed over her as the air seemed to thicken the shadows around her, stretching, reaching for her like tendrils, as if the house itself was trying to drag her into its depths. The book in her hands felt heavier, the light flickering from its pages now dim, its power waning. She had fought so hard to bring the light back, to banish the darkness, but now it seemed like the house was reclaiming what had been taken from it. "You have released me." The figure continued, its voice like the grinding of ancient stones. "And you will never leave. You will remain here, bound to the house, as it has claimed all before you." Clara's body shook with a chill. She couldn't escape, her skin prickling with cold as the figure moved closer. She could feel the air growing colder than it had ever been, and yet the room was alive with a presence that was ancient, far older than the house itself. It wasn't just darkness. It was something more, something older, something tied to the very land, to the very earth that the house had been built upon. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her eyes locked on the figure. There was no escape. Every exit seemed to close before her, every path retreating deeper into the maze of the house. The walls, once just decaying remnants of a forgotten home, now seemed to shift and breathe with a life of their own, drawing her deeper into its embrace. The figure's hand extended toward her, its fingers long and skeletal, wrapped in the shadows that seemed to warp and twist around its form. Clara's body instinctively pulled back, but there was nowhere to go. She was trapped, the weight of the house pressing in on her with suffocating intensity. "You are part of the house now," the voice whispered, its tone dripping with cold amusement. "The house is part of you, and you will never be free." Clara's eyes darted to the book in her hands, the only thing that had ever given her hope. She couldn't lose it, not now. The last vestige of light she had left. Her fingers tightened around the book as she forced herself to focus. The shadows continued to creep closer, but the book, the light was still there, still burning in her hands. Her mind raced. The house had fed on the souls of the past, on the fear of those who had entered before her. But she had to break it. She had to find the strength to end it, to destroy it once and for all. With a sudden burst of clarity, Clara stepped forward, holding the book out in front of her. Her voice shook, but she spoke with every ounce of defiance she had left. "I reject your power. I reject your curse." The words were faint at first, barely above a whisper, but the more she said them, the stronger her voice became, the more the light in the book grew. She could feel it. The light was fighting back, pushing against the darkness, creating a barrier between her and the figure. The shadows recoiled, the figure's form flickering, wavering in the light. "The light will never defeat me." The figure's voice was a growl now, its body vibrating with anger. "I am the house. I am the keeper. You are nothing." But Clara wasn't listening anymore. The book was glowing brighter now, its pages pulsing with energy, the symbols on its surface swirling and shifting as the power grew. The light intensified, pushing back against the figure, forcing it to step back. Its form flickering violently. "I am not nothing," Clara whispered, her voice steady, her body shaking with exhaustion, but her resolve stronger than ever. "I am everything." The light exploded from the book, enveloping her in a blinding flash. The figure let out a roar, its form disintegrating, collapsing into a cloud of shadows, vanishing in an instant. The room around her trembled, the walls cracking as the house seemed to let out a final desperate scream. The shadows twisted and snapped, breaking apart, and the air grew still. The house shuddered as though it had taken its last breath. Clara stood in the center of the room, panting, her heart racing, as the light from the book began to fade. The house was silent, dead silent, for the first time since entering. Clara felt empty. The weight, the oppressive darkness was gone. The house, the curse, was no more. But there was no victory dance, no relief, no moment of triumph. She had broken the curse, but the house had changed her. The shadows were gone, but Clara knew she would never leave this place unchanged. The book in her hands was cold now, its light completely extinguished. She dropped it to the floor, the soft thud of the book against the wooden boards, the only sound in the room. The house was still, empty. But Clara was left with the one lingering truth. There was no escaping the house. It had claimed her body and soul, and for as long as she lived, its curse would follow her, and she would never be free. The room around Clara remained deathly still, the only sound the pounding of her heart against her chest. The house, once alive with dark energy, now felt eerily vacant. She could no longer sense the oppressive weight of the curse that had pressed down on her, nor could she hear the whispers that had tormented her mind. It was as if the very air had been sucked out, leaving behind only an empty, cold shell, but she wasn't relieved. No, that would have been too simple. She stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the remnants of the house, the shadows that had once been so all-encompassing, now barely clinging to the edges. Her hands still trembled, her body weary. The book now discarded at her feet, its glow extinguished. She thought it was over. She had broken the curse. She had freed herself from the house's grasp. Yet the whispers were gone, but the lingering presence was still there. The house had been sealed, yes, but it had been waiting, hadn't it? Waiting for the right moment to strike back, to reclaim whatever it had lost. Clara glanced toward the door. The hallway beyond was quiet, but she could feel the pull, the invitation. The house hadn't relinquished its hold completely. No, this was merely a lull, a temporary reprieve, but she had to know. She had to understand what had happened here. With one last glance at the book, she picked it up again. It was cold now, but in her hands, she felt something stirring, something that hadn't quite gone dormant. She knew she couldn't stay in the room. The house, though no longer alive with the same malicious force, still had its secrets. The door creaked open as Clara stepped back into the hallway. The shadows were still present, though less tangible. The air around her seemed to pulse in a way that didn't feel right, almost like the house itself was drawing her forward. Her footsteps echoed in the stillness as she began walking down the long, dim corridor. She passed the rooms she had once feared to enter, each one seemingly unchanged, but hiding memories of fear and darkness. The house, now silent, still felt too alive. Clara couldn't shake the sense that something or someone was watching her. She paused at the end of the hallway. Ahead, another staircase led to the attic, the final part of the house she hadn't explored. Clara felt an undeniable pull to the stairs, and she knew deep down that this was where the truth lay hidden. Whatever remained of the curse, whatever had clung to the house, would be found there. Her legs trembled as she climbed the stairs, each step creaking beneath her weight. The narrow stairwell wound upward, and Clara's breath grew shallow. When she reached the top, she stood before a door, small and weathered, almost completely hidden by the passage of time. Her hand rested on the door's cool handle, and without a second thought, she opened it. The attic was vast, filled with forgotten relics and dust-covered furniture. Boxes, trunks, and cobwebs littered the floor, but there in the middle of the room stood an object that took her breath away. A mirror. The mirror was old, its frame carved with intricate designs, dark and warped with age. Its surface, though cracked in places, still reflected the dim light of the room. But as Clara's eyes locked on it, she felt a pull like gravity. Something inside the mirror called to her. She moved closer. Her breath caught in her throat. The air seemed to grow heavier with each step she took toward it, the room around her growing darker. The mirror seemed to pulse a faint glow coming from the cracks in its frame. And then the reflection changed. Clara blinked, her heart thudding in her chest as the image in the mirror shifted. She no longer saw herself. Instead, she saw a room, a dark room she didn't recognize. The walls were cracked, the ceiling broken as though the space had been abandoned for years. But there in the center stood a figure, a man cloaked in shadow, his face hidden beneath a hood. The figure reached toward the mirror, his hand slowly, deliberately stretching through the glass. Clara's stomach turned, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The hand reached closer, almost touching the surface of the mirror, and Clara's heart skipped a beat as she realized it was reaching for her. A surge of fear shot through her body, but she couldn't move. She stood frozen, her feet glued to the floor. The figure's hand, no longer a shadow, but real, pressed against the glass, and with a sudden crack, the mirror shattered. The glass splintered and flew outward, but Clara didn't flinch. Instead, she felt an overwhelming pressure, a force that seemed to pull her forward, pulling her into the mirror. The room seemed to tilt, and Clara felt an intense pressure gripping her chest, her body pinned in place by an unseen force. It was as if the house itself had reached out, seizing her, pulling her into the shattered fragments of the mirror. The glass did not fall to the floor as she expected. Instead, it swirled, suspended in midair, swirling like a vortex of broken light. A sharp, pulsing energy wrapped around her, drawing her toward the center of the mirror. The air crackled with static, and Clara gasped, her chest tightening as the room around her began to disappear. The walls, the attic, the house itself, all of it began to fade, replaced by darkness. Then, with a sudden snap, the pressure on her chest released. The swirling light stopped. Clara opened her eyes. She was no longer in the attic. She was standing in a vast, empty space surrounded by a soft, unsettling glow. The air was thick, damp, and cold, yet it felt wrong. The coldness was sharp, suffocating. She looked around, disoriented, her mind scrambling for answers. This wasn't the house anymore. This was something else. She took a tentative step forward, her heart hammering in her chest. The ground beneath her was smooth, almost polished, and beneath her feet, the surface seemed to shift, like it was reacting to her presence. She hesitated, every instinct screaming that she needed to leave, to go back to the house, to anything that was familiar. But the space around her had no walls, no boundaries. It was just endless, a black void stretching on in every direction with no beginning or end. The only source of light was the faint glow emanating from the surface beneath her, casting long, warped shadows on the ground. Clara spun around, searching for an exit, but there was nothing. Just infinite blackness stretching out into eternity. She swallowed hard, her breath shallow. There was no telling where she was. No telling if she was even alive anymore. Had the house taken her? Had the curse pulled her into this strange limbo? Then she heard it, a voice low, guttural, and familiar. It was the keeper's voice, but warped, distant, as if it were coming from everywhere at once. "Welcome back, Clara." Clara's pulse quickened. She spun around, searching for the source of the voice, but the darkness offered no answers. The voice was everywhere and nowhere. It was inside her head and the walls and the space around her. "You thought you could escape," the voice continued, "but you cannot escape what is part of you." A deep sense of dread began to fill Clara, a gnawing, terrible realization creeping through her mind. She wasn't in another dimension. She wasn't in some alternate space. She was still inside the house. The house had never left her. It had followed her here. The floor beneath her shifted again, and she stumbled, her legs weak. She wanted to scream, to fight back, but the words caught in her throat, swallowed by the oppressive weight of the voice that seemed to reach deeper inside her. "The house is not just a place," the voice whispered. "It is a part of you. You cannot escape its grasp. Not now. Not ever." Clara staggered back, her mind racing for some kind of escape. The voice was right. She hadn't left the house. She had merely crossed into its darker heart, the very essence of the curse that had always bound her. And now she was trapped in its center. A figure emerged from the darkness, its shape flickering in and out of existence like a mirage. It was a man cloaked in shadows, his face obscured by a dark hood. The figure's presence was familiar too. Familiar. Clara's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't the keeper. It wasn't the house. It was something far worse. This was the true essence of the house. The thing that had been pulling the strings from the very beginning. The ancient force that had taken root in the land and grown within the walls. The darkness that had fed on the fear of every soul that had dared to enter. The figure stepped forward, its shape growing clearer, revealing the rotting form of an ancient being. Its skin was ashen, its eyes glowing faintly with an unnatural light. "You cannot fight what is already part of you." The voice continued, now coming from the figure itself. "You were always meant to be here, always meant to feed the house. And now that the keeper is gone, I am the one who will guide you. You will join us, Clara. You will be our final piece." Clara's legs gave way beneath her as the truth hit her like a physical blow. She understood now. The house had never been just a place. It was a living, breathing entity that had been feeding on the souls of the damned. It had become a prison for those who entered. Each person swallowed whole, their essence consumed to sustain the house's power. She had been part of that cycle from the very beginning, just as the others had been. But there was more. "You belong to us now." The figure continued, stepping closer. "The curse is not broken. It has only begun." Clara's throat tightened, the air growing heavier with every step the figure took. She could feel its presence pressing in on her, suffocating her. The house had claimed her. The keeper was gone, but the darkness still lived. It wasn't just a force that had been trapped in the house. It was a force that had been using the house all along. And now that the keeper's reign was over, it was Clara's turn to take on the mantle. The house would feed on her now. She was the next soul to be consumed. "The darkness is eternal." The figure set, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. "And now, so are you." The figure reached out its fingers, long and bony, the air growing colder with each movement. Clara couldn't move. She was frozen in place, unable to escape. The last thing she saw before the shadows consumed her was the dark figure smiling. "Welcome home, Clara." Clara's mind screamed, her body still trapped in the unrelenting grip of the darkness. The figure's touch, cold as the grave, sent a shock of icy terror through her, and her limbs stiffened with fear. The shadows that had surrounded her before seemed to converge again, coiling around her like serpents. But this time, there was no room to fight, no moment of relief. The house had already claimed her body and soul, but in the depths of her mind, one thought rose above the rest. It's not over. The house had tried to swallow her, to pull her into its twisted reality where time and space lost all meaning. But Clara had fought too hard to let it win now. She wasn't a victim. She had faced worse, and she had survived. With every ounce of strength she had left, Clara closed her eyes and focused. She didn't know how much longer she could endure the pressure, but she had to fight. She had to break free. The shadows seemed to press in harder, filling the air around her, until she could no longer breathe. The whispers returned louder than ever, as though the house itself was mocking her. But in the chaos of the shadows and the dark voice of the figure, Clara found it, the spark. The house had tried to take her, but Clara had always been more than just a victim. She had been chosen. Chosen to break the curse, chosen to take back control. The house had underestimated her. Suddenly, Clara's vision cleared. The dark figure standing before her began to shift its form, flickering as if it were made of shadows. The feeling of suffocating pressure lessened, replaced with the unmistakable surge of power of light, a light that started to emanate from her. Clara's hands began to glow bright and steady, a soft but relentless light that pushed back the darkness. She felt the pulse of the house itself, its hunger, its fury coursing through her. But the light she had found within herself was stronger. The figure recoiled, its expression twisted with rage as it watched the light grow stronger. Clara's voice broke through the thick silence, quiet but powerful. "I won't let you control me." The air shifted again, and Clara felt her feet leave the ground, her body surrounded by the radiant light that seemed to pulse with every beat of her heart. She was no longer bound by the house, by the curse. This was her moment. The light exploded outward, flooding the room in a blinding flash. The figure screamed a deep, guttural howl that seemed to shake the very foundation of the house, and for a split second, Clara thought she could see cracks forming in the walls around her, like the house was breaking apart. The light from Clara's hands grew brighter, and the figure's form began to fragment, dissolving into the air as if it were made of mist. "No!" The figure's voice, now more desperate than ever, echoed through the room. "You cannot defeat me. I am the house. I am its master." But the light from Clara continued to expand, drowning the darkness, silencing the figure's cries. With every pulse of her own energy, the very structure of the house began to shake. The walls, once so solid and imposing, began to crack and crumble, as if the house itself was being undone piece by piece. The figure's last desperate plea was cut off as the shadows faded away completely, leaving behind only the glow of Clara's hands, now radiant and warm. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, and then the house collapsed. The ground trembled beneath Clara's feet, and the air around her seemed to tremble with the last remnants of the darkness she had fought. The walls of the house groaned, the very timbers cracking, splintering apart, as if they were being reduced to dust. The structure began to crumble, and Clara stumbled back, watching in awe as the once pristine house she had fought so hard to escape from fell apart before her eyes. She wasn't sure how long she stood there, but eventually the ground settled. The light faded, and the house was gone, completely disintegrated. There was no sign of the figure, no remnants of the darkness that had once consumed her. It was over. Clara took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her. The house, the curse, it was finished. The light had driven it out, shattered it. But as the dust settled around her, she felt something stir deep inside her. The house was gone, but its echo, its presence lingered. The book she had used to fight the darkness lay abandoned in the ruins, its pages fluttering in the wind. Clara bent down, picking it up once more. She didn't understand everything. She didn't know what had truly happened to the house, what power she had tapped into. But she knew one thing. She had broken free. The world outside the ruins of the house felt different. The sun was rising, its light spilling across the once dreaded landscape. The lake, which had once seemed so oppressive, was now calm, the surface of the water reflecting the sky above. But Clara knew the truth. This wasn't the end. The house had been destroyed, but it would always be a part of her. She had survived it, yes, but the darkness was far from gone. And so, as she walked away from the ruins of the house, Clara knew her journey was far from over. The darkness would find its way back, and she would be ready. Clara's feet sank into the soft earth beneath her as she walked away from the ruins of the house. The once oppressive towering structure had crumbled under the weight of the light she had summoned. The house was gone, but its presence still lingered, a quiet hum at the edge of her senses. The echoes of the darkness still whispered through her mind, but she pushed them away. It's over, she told herself. It's done. But as she walked further from the site of the house's destruction, the truth gnawed at her. The house was gone, yes, but there were pieces of it that had become a part of her. The book, the incantations, the power that had flowed through her. The curse was not easily erased. The house's destruction had not come from a simple defeat of evil. It had been a rupture, a violent shaking of something far older, far more dangerous. She could still feel it, those fragments of darkness that had once rooted themselves deep within the house. They had not disappeared. They were inside of her now, as much a part of her as her own breath. The air was crisp as Clara continued walking the landscape around her, open and vast, the sun just beginning to rise over the horizon. The ground felt solid beneath her feet, but her mind swam with uncertainty. She wasn't sure where she was going. She had never been sure, but she felt a pull and urge to keep moving forward, away from the ruins of the house. The lake, once dark and ominous, now looked calm, the water shimmering beneath the early morning light. She paused, looking out at the stillness, her mind drifting back to the moments inside the house, to the figure in the mirror, the voice of the keeper, and the overwhelming darkness that had nearly consumed her. But now, the world around her felt like it was breathing again. The weight of the house had been lifted, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Clara felt an inkling of peace, but the unease still lingered. She could feel the whispers at the back of her mind, faint but persistent. You're not free. She closed her eyes, shaking her head as though to dismiss the thought. No, I am free. The house is gone. I'm free. But deep down, she knew the truth. The house might have crumbled, but the darkness was still there. It had been inside the house for centuries, feeding on the souls of the damned. And now, it had found a new vessel. Her. Clara's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind her. She spun around, her heart pounding, but there was nothing there. The world around her was empty, silent, except for the faint whisper of the wind rustling the leaves in the trees. She was alone, but she wasn't truly alone, was she? The shadows were still there, hidden in the spaces between the trees, coiling like serpents in the corners of her mind. The darkness was waiting, patient, biding its time. Clara began walking again, faster this time, her pace quickening as the shadows seemed to stretch toward her. She needed to get away, to find somewhere, anywhere where she could breathe without the weight of the house pressing on her chest. But every step she took only seemed to draw her further into the pull of the darkness. You can't escape. Her breath quickened, her pulse racing as she sprinted forward, the landscape around her blurring. She felt it. It was following her, closing in, pulling her towards something. But what? Was it the remnants of the curse? Or was it something far worse? Suddenly, Clara stumbled her foot, catching on something hidden beneath the grass. She fell to the ground with a sharp gasp, scraping her palms against the rough earth. Her breath was ragged as she struggled to get back on her feet, but when she looked up, she saw something that made her blood run cold. In the distance, barely visible against the horizon, there was a figure. It was too far away for her to see clearly, but she could feel its presence, its malevolent energy radiating from it, like a pulse, a heartbeat. The figure stood tall, cloaked in shadows, its features obscured, but she knew it. It was the keeper, but this time, it wasn't the same figure she had faced before. This figure was different, stronger, more powerful, and it was waiting for her standing in the distance like a silent sentinel, its very presence commanding the world around it to freeze. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she realized what had happened. The house hadn't just claimed her, it had transferred its power into her. She had become the keeper. The house had passed its curse onto her, and now she was bound to it, just as the keeper had once been. Her legs trembled beneath her as she stood up, her eyes locked on the figure in the distance. It was still there waiting for her, as though it was calling her forward. She couldn't move. Her feet felt as if they were stuck in place, as though the earth itself had rooted her to the ground. The figure took a slow step toward her, its movement graceful and deliberate. The distance between them seemed to shrink with every passing second, but Clara couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. "You belong to the house now," the figure whispered, its voice echoing through her mind. "And the darkness will never leave you. It is part of you, and you are part of it." Clara's chest tightened as the words echoed through her, reverberating inside her skull. She could feel the power of the house coursing through her veins, mingling with her own blood, with her very essence. It was inescapable. The keeper was no longer just a figure. It was her. She was the keeper now. "Welcome home," the figure said, its voice now filled with an eerie sense of triumph. Clara closed her eyes, the weight of the curse pressing down on her, suffocating her. She had fought so hard, had struggled so long, but she had failed. She hadn't destroyed the house. She had become the house. The darkness was inside her, and there was no escaping it. Clara stood frozen, her body trembling as the weight of the figure's words pressed into her chest, suffocating her breath. "Welcome home." The words felt like a cruel mockery of everything she had fought for. She had been so certain that destroying the house would set her free, that the curse would finally be lifted. But now, standing here in the open field, the realization hit her like a ton of bricks. She was the house. Her hands shook violently, her fingers gripping the edges of the earth beneath her, as if to steady herself against the overwhelming force inside her. The ground beneath her felt unstable, the earth pulsing with an energy that she now realized was her own. The power of the house, its malevolent curse, was embedded deep within her. She wasn't just a survivor. She was the keeper now. The house had passed its curse onto her, and she could feel it coursing through her, dark, endless, relentless. The figure in the distance began to move closer, its form becoming clearer with each step. Clara's vision blurred and her mind raced with panic. She wanted to flee, to run away from this horrible fate that she had unwillingly inherited, but her legs refused to move. It was as if the house, the curse, had taken over every part of her being, leaving no room for escape. "You cannot outrun yourself," the figure spoke again, its voice like sandpaper scraping against stone. "The house is in your blood now. It will always be a part of you. You are bound to it, just as I was bound, just as every keeper before us was bound." Clara's mind swam with a desperate desire to break free, to find a way to undo the curse. She couldn't be this thing. She couldn't become the very evil she had fought to destroy. She had come so far. She had won against the darkness, hadn't she? But the house, it was more than just a building. It was an ancient force, a thing born from the land, from time itself. The keeper hadn't left her. It had simply transferred its power, its curse, into her, and now she was a part of it. She was the new keeper. And the house was her. Tears filled her eyes, blurring her vision as she sank to her knees, her mind spiraling. There had to be a way out. There had to be a way to fight this. She glanced up at the figure now just a few feet away. It was tall, looming, but as it moved closer, Clara saw that its face was not one of malice. It was her face, twisted, pale, empty. The shadow of herself. The very thing she feared becoming. The face of the keeper. "You are me," the figure said softly, almost with a sad, knowing tone. "And I am you. We are the same. We were always meant to be." Clara's heart raced, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "No," she whispered, shaking her head, but the figure continued its steady approach. "You see, Clara," it said, its voice soft, now filled with something almost kind, "the darkness was never just in the house. It's in you, too. It's in everyone. The house was only a vessel, a prison that contained it. But now the darkness has no limits. It is free to roam with you." The words cut through Clara like a blade. She wanted to scream, to fight, but her body refused to move. It was as if the curse, the house itself, had taken control over every part of her. "You cannot undo what you have done," the figure whispered, stepping closer, its fingers reaching toward her. "The darkness was never something you could defeat. It was something that would always find a way to be reborn." Clara's eyes locked onto the figures, her reflection staring back at her with cold, hollow eyes. The darkness inside her began to stir, rising like a tidal wave, threatening to consume everything. It felt like a slow, creeping invasion, pushing at the edges of her mind, whispering promises of power, of strength, of control. The very thing the keeper had once wanted, but Clara wasn't the keeper. Not yet. She still had control, at least she thought she did. The house was gone, but the curse was within her, and no matter how hard she fought it, no matter how much she wanted to reject it, it was part of her. She had become the house. The figure reached out, placing its hand on her shoulder. Clara's skin burned beneath its touch, but instead of pulling away, she felt the dark pull of the house spreading through her, entwining with her. The power was there, latent, waiting to rise again. "Fight it," the figure whispered, as if it were offering her a choice. "Fight it, and become what you were always meant to be." The darkness inside Clara surged, a violent rush of cold energy that filled her chest, her mind. She could feel the house inside her, beneath her skin, in her blood, and it whispered, soothing her, promising her strength. Her fingers twitched as the dark power beckoned, but Clara remembered. She remembered the light that had once banished the darkness, the strength she had used to fight the house before. It had not disappeared. It was still inside her. With every ounce of strength she had left, Clara clenched her fists, pushing back against the darkness that tried to take hold of her. She had to fight, the pull fight, the temptation. She could not let herself become the keeper. She had to keep fighting. The ground beneath her feet began to rumble, the shadows gathering once again around her. The house, her curse, was drawing on her energy, feeding off her fear, her reluctance. But she would not let it take her. She had already faced darkness before, and she would face it again. Clara stood, her chest rising with each labored breath, her fists clenched tight. She raised her arms high, focusing on the light that had once saved her, that had once driven back the curse. The light surged again, this time stronger than before, pushing back against the shadows, against the figure, against the very darkness inside her. The figure recoiled, but Clara stood firm. "I am not you," she cried, her voice trembling but filled with newfound strength. I am me. The light burst from her, radiating outward like a star exploding in the night sky. The shadows shrieked in pain, writhing as the light burned through them, shattering the remnants of the curse that had once bound her. And as the light flooded the space, Clara felt the weight of the house's darkness break the very essence of the curse, dissolving in the light. The figure vanished. The light faded, and with it the oppressive air that had surrounded Clara for so long. She stood alone in the now silent space, the echoes of the battle still lingering in the air, like the fading remnants of a storm. Her heart pounded in her chest, but the weight of the darkness had finally lifted. The house, the curse, it was gone. For a moment, Clara didn't move. She stood perfectly still, as if expecting something to return, expecting the shadows to creep back and reclaim her. But nothing came. The air was clear now, fresh and still, like a heavy burden had been lifted from her shoulders. The land around her, the remnants of the house, seemed to breathe with relief. The trees stood tall, their branches no longer bent under the weight of the curse. The earth beneath her feet, firm and grounded. The sun was rising higher in the sky, its golden rays cutting through the fog that had once clouded everything in shadow. The world felt alive again, vibrant in a way it hadn't in so long. But Clara knew that the peace she felt now was fleeting. She had fought hard, used every ounce of strength to break free. But the house had been more than just a structure. It was a part of something much larger, something far older than her. And though she had defeated it, she couldn't shake the feeling that it had only been a temporary reprieve. There was a darkness in the world and the land that went beyond the house. And it still called to her, still whispered in the corners of her mind, a reminder that some curses could never truly be destroyed, only delayed. She took a deep breath, trying to center herself. There was no time to dwell on what might come. She had to move forward, find a way to live with what had been done, with what she had become. But as she turned toward the horizon, a movement caught her eye. She looked up, and her heart skipped a beat as she saw something on the edge of the woods, an outline in the distance, a figure standing motionless under the trees. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she stepped forward. Her legs felt weak, as though the darkness had taken the last of her strength. But she couldn't stop now. She couldn't leave. Not after everything she had been through. The figure in the distance stood perfectly still, its form bathed in the early morning light. It was tall, cloaked in shadows, its face hidden under a hood. The same figure, she realized, the one she had seen in the mirror before. The one that had been calling her back. Her steps faltered as she approached, fear clawing at her insides. She wasn't ready for this. She wasn't prepared for whatever this figure represented. But there was no turning back now. The figure's head turned slightly, its gaze settling on her. Clara stopped in her tracks, her heart racing, as the figure lifted a hand toward her, as if beckoning her forward. The moment was charged with an energy she couldn't explain. A pull, a tug like gravity itself had shifted. Clara wanted to turn and run to flee from whatever this figure was, but her feet refused to move. She was stuck, bound to the house, bound to the darkness. She had broken free, but she had also become a part of it. It had changed her. You cannot outrun your fate. Clara. The figure spoke its voice, a low, gravelly echo of the house's past. You were always meant to be the keeper. Clara's chest tightened. She was no longer sure whether the words were meant to torment her or comfort her. She didn't know what this figure was or what it wanted, but she knew it wasn't over. With each word, the shadows around her seemed to pulse, as though they were alive, responding to the figure's presence. The house even now was still inside her, its darkness, its curse, its power. She could feel it deep within, As if it had become part of her very soul, she stood frozen, unable to speak. The figure's gaze held her captive, pulling her in with an intensity that was both terrifying and familiar. "You've defeated the house," the figure continued, its voice almost regretful. "But the curse was never just about the house. It is within you now. You will carry it with you wherever you go." Clara's pulse quickened as the figure stepped closer, its form becoming clearer. The light around them flickered as the figure's shape seemed to shift, becoming a reflection of her own darkened self. The keeper's figure. Her figure. Her mind raced as she tried to understand what was happening. This figure was not just a manifestation of the house, it was a part of her, a reflection of what she had become. "You cannot destroy what is a part of you," the figure whispered. "The house lives in you now. You are the keeper." The words sank deep into Clara's chest, squeezing the breath from her lungs. She had fought so hard, struggled to break free, but now she saw it. The truth. The house was never gone. It had never been just the physical space, it was a living entity, an ancient force that had attached itself to her very being. The darkness was in her. She was the darkness. Clara stumbled back, feeling a wave of nausea wash over her. She wanted to fight, to scream, to destroy this figure. But as she did, she felt the shadows stir again inside her. They were inside her, a part of her now. She was the keeper bound to the curse. And so the house had claimed its final victory. Clara stood there, her body trembling, her mind overwhelmed. The figure before her was no longer just a specter. It had become a mirror to the deepest part of her soul, reflecting everything she had tried to escape. She was the keeper. The house's curse had become her burden, and now she could feel it wrapping around her, tightening like a noose that would never loosen. The figure in front of her moved again, its shadowy form gliding through the air with a slow, deliberate pace. Every step it took was echoed by the dark energy inside Clara, as if the house itself were walking alongside her. The weight of the figure's presence was almost unbearable, its gaze piercing through her very essence. "You thought you could defeat it," the figure said softly, its voice almost soothing now. "You thought that by destroying the house, you could rid yourself of the darkness. But you've only embraced it. The house has always been inside you, Clara. Always." Clara closed her eyes, trying to block out the words. She had to focus. She had to find a way to fight this, to reclaim herself. But the weight of the figure's presence grew heavier, the air around her becoming thick with its power. The house, the curse it was within her, now flowing through her veins, whispering in the back of her mind. There was no escaping it. "I didn't choose this," Clara whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "I didn't want this." The figure's head tilted, its expression unreadable beneath the hood, but Clara could feel the intensity of its gaze. It didn't need to speak to convey its response. Clara was a prisoner, trapped in the very core of the house, bound by the darkness that had once consumed it. The house had never been just a place, it was a part of her now and forever. The figure extended a long skeletal hand toward her, its fingers pale and twisted. Clara wanted to recoil, to pull away, but her feet felt rooted to the ground. She was powerless. "You don't have to fight it," the figure said, its voice soft and almost inviting. "You don't have to resist anymore. Embrace the darkness, and you will become something more. Something stronger. The house is in you. You are the house now." Clara's heart hammered in her chest. She wanted to scream, to reject what the figure was offering, but the pull of the darkness, the call of the curse was too strong. She could feel it calling to her, wrapping itself around her thoughts, drawing her in. But then something shifted. A faint glimmer of light flickered in her mind. A memory that cut through the oppressive fog of the curse. It was a memory of before, of when she had first stepped into the house, unaware of what was to come. She had fought to survive. She had fought to be free. This wasn't her. This wasn't who she was meant to be. No. Clara whispered, her voice trembling but gaining strength. I won't become this. I won't become you. The figure's expression darkened, its shadowy form flickering with anger. You cannot escape it. The darkness is you. It always will be. Clara's breath came faster now, her hands shaking at her sides. She could feel the power of the house, the curse pulsing through her, but she would not let it take her. She would not let it define her. With a forceful exhale, Clara clenched her fists, her knuckles white, as she gripped the very essence of her being. This was not her fate. She was more than the house. She was more than the curse. The figure lunged forward, but this time Clara was ready. She stepped back, her hand reaching out instinctively, summoning the very light she had used to banish the darkness before. It surged from her fingertips, pushing back the shadows, burning through the very air around her. No! The figure screamed, its form beginning to fracture under the force of Clara's light. You cannot fight what you are. The darkness recoiled as the light expanded, radiating from Clara's body, filling the space around her with warmth and clarity. The shadows that had once surrounded her, once defined her, began to shrivel and dissipate the darkness, screaming as it was pushed back. I am me. Clara said, her voice stronger now, steady with conviction. And I will never be you. With one final surge of light, the figure shattered its form, dissolving into a cloud of shadow that evaporated into the air. The darkness screamed in a final, futile attempt to hold on to her. But Clara's light burned brighter than ever, eradicating it completely. The last remnants of the curse were washed away, the power that had once consumed her now broken. For a long moment the silence returned, peaceful and still. The air around Clara felt lighter, the weight she had carried for so long finally lifting from her shoulders. She had fought, and she had won. She wasn't just a survivor of the house anymore. She was free. But as she looked around, Clara couldn't help but feel the faintest whisper in the back of her mind. The darkness had been vanquished for now, but she knew better than to think it was truly gone. It wasn't something that could be erased, not entirely. It was within her now. It had always been. And though the house had crumbled, though its curse had been broken, Clara would carry its weight with her forever, but she would not be defined by it. She would fight for as long as it took. She would find a way to keep the darkness at bay. With a final glance at the ruins of the house, Clara turned and walked away, leaving the shadows behind. The path ahead was uncertain, but she knew one thing for sure: she was no longer a prisoner. She was free, for now. Clara's steps were slow at first, each movement weighed down by the enormity of what she had just done. The house, the keeper, the curse, it was all behind her now, in ruins scattered to the winds. Yet as she walked away from the remnants of her past, a lingering sense of dread twisted in her chest, as if the darkness was still there, watching her from the edges of her mind. She tried to shake the feeling off, telling herself that it was over. The house had crumbled. The curse had been broken. But deep down, she couldn't ignore the gnawing truth that remained. The darkness had been a part of her, had become her. And though the house no longer loomed over her, she felt its cold, suffocating presence in the very pit of her stomach. As Clara moved further away from the ruins, the world seemed to stretch before her, endless and open, the horizon wide and promising. The sun had risen, fully bathing everything in golden light, but she couldn't escape the feeling that the light was only temporary, like a fragile shield against something far more ancient, far darker. The weight of the past was heavy, but there was no time to dwell on it. Clara had to keep moving. She needed answers, a purpose beyond the chaos of the house. She had been consumed by it for so long, but now she had to forge her own path. She had to live. She walked along the edge of the forest, the trees towering over her like silent sentinels. As the morning sun bathed the world in light, the air felt crisp, fresh, and full of possibility. It was as if the curse had finally been lifted from the earth itself, the land breathing once more. But no matter how much she tried to ignore it, Clara couldn't escape the whisper. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there, right beneath the surface of her thoughts. The darkness still called to her, and as much as she longed for peace, she knew that it wasn't over. "You cannot escape the house, Clara." She stopped in her tracks. The voice wasn't the keeper's. It wasn't the house itself. It was her own. A whisper barely audible, but so familiar, it felt like an echo from the deepest corners of her soul. Clara's heart pounded as she looked around, expecting to see someone. But there was no one, only the forest, stretching endlessly into the distance. "The house is in you now. It always will be." Her breath caught in her throat. The words, the warning, were clear now, no longer whispers, but statements, undeniable truths. Clara closed her eyes, trying to steady herself, but she could feel the weight of it pressing on her once more. The darkness, the curse, it was all still there, woven into her very being. Her hands shook as she reached for her chest, feeling the rapid beat of her heart beneath her skin. It wasn't just her thoughts. It was inside her. She could feel the darkness in her veins, pulsing with an energy she couldn't escape. She hadn't destroyed the house. She had only shattered its form. The curse, it had become her now. "You are the keeper." The voice echoed again, as if the house itself had taken root inside her. "And you will never be free." Clara collapsed to her knees, her head spinning. She fought it. She had to fight it. She couldn't be this thing. She couldn't be the keeper. But the truth was undeniable. It was part of her. No matter how far she walked, how much she ran, she would always carry the house inside her. The land had been freed from the house, but she had inherited its power, its curse. She wasn't just Clara anymore. She was both. She was the keeper, and the keeper was her. Tears stung her eyes as she clenched her fists, trying to hold on to some shred of herself to deny the truth. But in the end, she knew. She couldn't escape. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves around her. She looked up, wiping her eyes as a figure appeared before her, emerging from the shadows of the trees. It was a man, a tall figure, his face obscured by a hood. He moved with purpose, as though he had been waiting for her. Clara didn't speak, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from him. "You are not alone," the man said, his voice low and steady. "You never were. You never will be." Clara's breath caught in her throat. She had no idea who he was, but something about him felt familiar. The same presence, the same weight she had felt in the house. He was connected to the darkness, just as she was. "What do you want?" Clara whispered the words, shaky but firm. The man tilted his head, and when he spoke again, his words were filled with a strange sadness. "I want to help you, Clara. You are not the first to be chosen by the house, but you are different. You are stronger than the others." Clara recoiled, the weight of his words sinking deep. "Help me. How could you help me? You carry the curse," he said softly, stepping closer. "And you must learn how to wield it. If you do not, it will consume you as it has consumed so many before you." Clara shook her head violently. She wasn't ready for this. She didn't want it. She didn't want the darkness. "I can't. I won't. I won't let it consume me." The man knelt before her, his hand reaching out, a quiet understanding in his eyes. "It has already taken root, Clara. You cannot undo it. But you can control it. You can become it. And in doing so, you can save not just yourself, But others, Clara felt the weight of his words like a cold wave crashing over her. The darkness, the curse, it wasn't just a thing she had to fight. It was something she had to understand. She couldn't run from it. She couldn't hide from it. She had to learn how to control it, to become it. You are the keeper. The man repeated, his voice softer now. And the darkness will follow you. But you can choose how to wield it. Clara took a deep breath, steadying herself. The house had always been more than just a building. It was a part of something much larger, a force that had always been there waiting for someone to take its place. She was that someone. And now she had to decide what to do with the power, with the curse that had been passed to her. Her eyes locked with the man's. He wasn't an enemy. He was an ally, a guide. But the question remained, could she control the darkness? Or would it consume her, just as it had consumed everyone who had come before her? I'm ready, Clara whispered, though her voice quivered with doubt. The man nodded slowly. Then let's begin. And as Clara stood, a new chapter of her journey began, one where she would face the darkness within and learn how to wield the power that could either save the world or destroy it. The air around Clara was still, but beneath her skin, she could feel the tension building. The man in front of her stood tall, his presence steady and calm, a quiet strength that seemed to flow from him. He was no longer just a stranger. His words had struck a chord within her, resonating with something deep inside her soul. Then let's begin. The man's voice carried a finality to it, but also a sense of patience, as if he had been waiting for this moment for a long time, for her to come to terms with the darkness that had taken root in her. Clara looked up at the sky, the golden rays of the sun casting long shadows across the land. The air felt warmer, almost comforting, yet she could feel the darkness pulsing beneath her skin, a coldness that would never truly go away. It was a part of her now, inseparable, like a shadow that clung to her every move, but she had a choice. She could either let it consume her, let the house's curse drown her in its power, or she could learn to control it. She could learn to become the keeper, not just a vessel for the darkness, but a force that could command it. Clara's hands trembled, but she forced herself to steady them. Her fingers curled into fists, and she could feel the warmth from the earth beneath her, the connection to the world around her. It was almost like the land itself was alive, breathing, responding to her. She was no longer just walking through a world of light and shadow. She was a part of it, bound to it, in a way she had never fully understood until now. The man in front of her took a slow step forward. His eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time, Clara didn't feel afraid. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing: she had a chance to rewrite her destiny. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She wasn't the victim of the house or its curse. She was the keeper, and she had the power to control it. You will need to learn to embrace it. The man said, his voice steady, but there was a hint of something darker, something that Clara couldn't quite place. The house has shaped you, but you are not its puppet. You must be its master. Clara nodded, though a part of her wanted to recoil from the thought of what that truly meant. The house, this cursed, malevolent thing, had shaped her into something she wasn't sure she recognized. It had taken away her freedom, consumed her past, and forced its darkness upon her. But she couldn't undo that. It was part of her now. The man stepped closer, and Clara felt a strange pull, like a tether between them, that had been formed by the very house itself. She could feel the weight of the curse in her chest and her bones. The man's eyes glinted with something sharp, something that Clara couldn't quite place. The first lesson, the man said, his voice low, is understanding that the darkness is not your enemy. It is your power. Clara swallowed hard, her breath catching in her throat. What do you mean? The man's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. You have to stop fighting it. You cannot defeat the darkness, Clara. You must become it. The words sent a chill down her spine. She had been running from the darkness for so long, but what if she was running from the very thing that could give her control, that could make her powerful? The house had tried to make her its prisoner, but perhaps it was time to turn the tables to bend the power to her will. You have to understand, the man continued. The house is not just a building. It is a force, a source of power that has existed long before the house was built. It has been here for centuries, and it will be here long after the house is gone. But now, it is yours. And with that power, you can shape the world around you. You can use it to protect what you love, or to destroy. Clara's heart skipped a beat. Destroy. Could she really do that? Could she use the darkness inside her to hurt others? No, she wouldn't. She couldn't let herself become a monster. She had to learn control, not destruction. The light within her, the light that had once driven back the darkness, would guide her. She had to believe that. The man seemed to sense her hesitation, his gaze softening slightly. The choice is yours, Clara. You can use the power to protect, to change things. But you must accept that this power is part of you. You cannot fight it forever. Clara took a deep breath, the weight of his words sinking in. The choice was hers, but how could she trust herself? The darkness was powerful, seductive, but so was the light. She had used it before to break the house's hold on her. She could use it again. I don't want to hurt anyone, Clara said quietly, her voice filled with determination. I want to use this power to stop others from going through what I went through. I want to protect. The man's expression softened, and he nodded slowly. Then you must learn to master the balance, Clara. Embrace the darkness, but never let it consume you. Learn to use it to your advantage to control it, and you will become stronger than the house ever was. Clara closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. The weight of her destiny felt unbearable, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't alone. The house had made her a keeper, but she could choose what kind of keeper she would become. The darkness would always be a part of her, but she would use it to protect, to fight for the light. She wasn't the victim anymore. She was the keeper, and she would define what that meant. When Clara opened her eyes again, the man was gone. The forest around her was calm, peaceful, the sun shining brightly through the trees. She felt the weight of the darkness still inside her, but it was no longer suffocating. It was a part of her, yes, but it did not control her. Clara took one last look at the landscape, the house long gone behind her. The world before her was open, full of possibilities. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she had a choice. She would walk this path with the power she had inherited, with the darkness she had learned to control, and she would decide what kind of keeper she would become. Clara stood at the edge of the forest, the remnants of the house far behind her now. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it a sense of renewal, as if the earth itself were shaking off the weight of the curse that had plagued it for so long. Clara took a deep breath, the cool air filling her lungs, grounding her. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt a strange, quiet peace. The darkness was still there, lurking just beneath the surface, but it no longer had a hold on her. She could feel the pulse of it inside her, like the beat of her own heart, but it was no longer overwhelming. It was a part of her, yes, but it didn't define her. She had a choice. Clara took a few steps forward, her eyes scanning the horizon, the vast open land that stretched out before her. She didn't know where she was headed, but she knew she couldn't stay here. in the place that had been the source of all her pain. The house, with all its evil, was gone. But the curse was still alive, and she couldn't forget that. There were others out there who needed help, others who might fall victim to the same darkness she had fought so hard to escape. Her thoughts were interrupted by the faint sound of footsteps behind her. She turned sharply, her senses on high alert, but there was no one there. Just the wind rustling the leaves in the trees. She swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. Stop being paranoid, she told herself. You're free. You're safe. But even as she thought those words, a shiver ran down her spine. The shadows still lingered, creeping around the edges of her mind, as though they were waiting for her to slip, to falter. Clara clenched her fists at her sides. She couldn't let the darkness win. Not now. Not ever again. Taking another deep breath, Clara turned away from the forest and began walking toward the open field. She didn't know where she was going, but she had a sense that she was being drawn to something. The power within her, the house's power, still surged beneath her skin, guiding her in ways she didn't fully understand. It wasn't just a curse anymore. It was her strength, her weapon. She would learn how to wield it. She would become the keeper she was meant to be, not just the victim. As Clara walked, she noticed something in the distance, something that hadn't been there before. A small village nestled in the valley between two hills. The houses were simple, but there was life there. People. The thought of seeing others made her stomach twist with both fear and anticipation. What if they sensed the darkness inside her? What if they rejected her, afraid of what she had become? But Clara knew she couldn't hide from the world forever. She had been given this power for a reason. She had to use it to help, to protect, to prevent what had happened to her from happening to anyone else. With her resolve hardened, Clara quickened her pace toward the village. As she neared the outskirts, the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows on the ground. She could see people walking down the streets, but they didn't seem to notice her, too wrapped up in their own lives to see the keeper walking among them. Her hand instinctively reached for the hidden blade at her side, a weapon she had forged during her time inside the house, a tool to protect herself. But she knew that the true power lay within her, in the darkness she had learned to command. She wasn't sure what would come next, but she had to be ready. As Clara entered the village, she could feel the eyes of the people on her. They seemed to look past her, as if sensing the presence of something otherworldly, but not quite knowing what to make of it. Clara's pulse quickened, and she squared her shoulders, trying to appear confident, even though a part of her still felt the weight of the curse inside her. It wasn't long before an older man approached her, his eyes wise and kind, yet searching. There was something about him that reminded Clara of the figure who had spoken to her earlier, the one who had guided her toward accepting the darkness. The man's gaze was piercing, and for a moment, Clara thought he could see right through her. "You are not from here, are you?" he asked, his voice steady, as though he had been waiting for her to arrive. Clara paused, unsure of how to respond. "No," she said quietly. I'm just passing through." The man nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving hers. "I can feel it." Clara's heart skipped a beat. The man had sensed it, the darkness that lay within her. "Feel what?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The weight of the curse you carry." The man replied softly. "You are marked, child. The house has chosen you, and now you must choose how to wield its power. Will you use it to protect the world from the darkness, or will you let it consume you once more?" Clara's breath caught in her throat as the man's words sank in. She hadn't realized until now how much she had been running from her destiny. She had been so focused on escaping the house, on destroying the curse, that she hadn't truly stopped to consider what came after. What came when she was free? The man smiled gently, sensing the turmoil in her thoughts. "It is not too late," he said, his voice like a balm. "You are not alone. There are others like you. People who have been touched by the darkness but have learned to control it. If you are willing, we can teach you." Clara's mind raced as she processed his words. Was she ready to accept what she had become? To learn how to control the power that had once threatened to consume her? The thought of embracing the darkness in a new way terrified her, but at the same time, a spark of hope ignited within her. Maybe this was what she had been searching for, a chance to finally control her fate. The man extended his hand toward her, his eyes warm with understanding. "Will you join us, Clara? Will you learn how to wield the power inside you to protect the world?" Clara hesitated, looking at his hand, then at the village around her. She had fought so hard to be free. But freedom, she realized, wasn't just escaping the darkness. It was learning to live with it, to understand it, and use it for good. With a steady breath, Clara took the man's hand. The weight of the curse was still there, but now she knew how to carry it. The journey ahead would be long, and the darkness would always be with her. But for the first time, she felt ready. And with that, Clara began her new journey, not as the victim of the house, but as its keeper, the guardian of the darkness. Clara's grip on the old man's hand tightened as she stood in the heart of the village. Her mind was still racing the enormity of what she had just committed to settling in her chest like a leaden weight. But as the man led her through the cobbled streets, a sense of calm began to wash over her. For the first time since she had stepped foot in the cursed house, she felt like she was walking on solid ground, like she had finally found her place in the world. The villagers went about their daily routines, oblivious to the quiet storm of power that Clara now carried within her. She couldn't help but wonder if the darkness she had inherited was visible to them in some way, if they could feel its pulse, its power. But no one seemed to notice her. They walked past her as if she were just another traveler, just another soul passing through. The man whose name Clara learned was Elias led her to a small cottage nestled at the edge of the village. It was modest, with a thatched roof and ivy crawling up its stone walls. There was a calmness to it, a sense of quiet purpose. This place didn't feel like it belonged to the world of chaos and destruction that had once been the house. It felt like something more peaceful, more grounded. Elias opened the door with a quiet creak, ushering Clara inside. The room was filled with books, shelves lined with dusty tomes and ancient scrolls. The air smelled of herbs and parchment, and there was a faint flickering light coming from the hearth at the far side of the room. It was warm here, in a way that felt safe, as though this place had been untouched by the darkness that had consumed so much of her life. "Sit," Elias said, gesturing to a chair by the fire. Clara obeyed without thinking, her body sinking into the soft cushions as if it had been waiting for her to stop moving. She had been running for so long, but now, for the first time in so long, she could finally breathe. Elias sat down across from her, his weathered hands resting on his knees as he studied her. There was a depth in his eyes, a wisdom that came from years of knowing the weight of what Clara had only just begun to understand. "You've come a long way," he said, his voice soft but firm. "But you've only just begun, Clara. The path you walk now is one that many before you have walked. The Keeper's path is not an easy one." Clara swallowed hard, her thoughts swirling in a mix of fear and curiosity. She had known that the darkness would always be with her, but hearing it from Elias made it real in a way that made her feel like she had only just stepped into the true weight of her role. "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know how to control it, how to be the keeper. I'm afraid of what I might become. Elias leaned forward, his gaze intense but not unkind. You don't need to fear it, Clara. The darkness inside you is not inherently evil. It has the potential to destroy, yes, but it also has the potential to heal, to protect, to guide. It is about balance. And that is what you must learn, how to balance the light and the dark within yourself. Clara closed her eyes, the weight of his words sinking deep into her. The house had been her prison, and for so long she had fought to escape it. But now she was realizing that escape wasn't the answer. She couldn't run from what was inside her. She had to understand it, control it, or it would control her. I will teach you. Elias continued, his voice calm. But you must be willing to face your darkest fears. The house has a way of shaping its keepers, and you are no exception. You will be tested over and over again until you learn to stand strong in the face of what's within you. Clara nodded slowly, her resolve hardening. She didn't have all the answers, and she didn't know if she was ready to fully embrace the darkness inside her. But she had no choice. She couldn't keep running from it. And maybe, just maybe, if she learned to control it, she could turn it into something good. Something she could use to protect others, to prevent the horrors she had faced from reaching anyone else. Elias stood moving to a nearby table where a collection of books and scrolls lay open. He gestured for Clara to follow him, and she did, moving toward the desk with a sense of determination she hadn't felt in a long time. The first step, Elias said, is understanding what binds the darkness to you. The house's curse is a complex thing woven into your very soul. It will take time for you to truly understand it, to fully wield its power. But you must begin with the basics. He handed her a small leather-bound book. Its cover was worn, the edges frayed, but it felt important, heavy in her hands. Clara opened the book, her eyes scanning the faded ink on the pages. This book contains the foundation of the Keeper's power, Elias explained. It is written by those who have come before you, those who learn to control the darkness and use it for good. But be warned, this is not an easy journey. Many before you have failed. They let the darkness consume them, and it became too powerful to contain. Clara's fingers hovered over the text, the ancient symbols dancing before her eyes. She could feel the energy in the room shift like a current in the air, vibrating with something she couldn't yet comprehend. It was as though the book itself was alive, waiting for her to unlock its secrets. Elias gave her a nod of encouragement. Read, he said softly. Understand. The darkness will try to cloud your mind to confuse you. But if you can learn to see through it, you will gain the power to control it. And with that power, you can choose what kind of keeper you will be. Clara took a deep breath, her heart steadying as she began to read the ancient text. The darkness inside her whispered, tugged at her, but this time she didn't recoil. She welcomed it, not as an enemy, but as a part of herself she had to learn to understand. And as she read, she felt the first spark of something new, a sense of control, of purpose. The journey ahead was long, but she knew now that she was no longer alone. The house might have shaped her, but she would define what came next. Clara's fingers traced the worn edges of the leather-bound book, her breath steadying as she absorbed the ancient text before her. The language was old, filled with symbols and phrases that made her head swim. But something in her gut told her that the more she read, the clearer it would become. The darkness had tried to claim her, to consume her, but now she was taking the first steps toward understanding it, learning how to command it, rather than be ruled by it. The words on the page seemed to shift before her eyes, their meaning settling deeper into her consciousness with each passing moment. There was something strange about the book. It felt alive, like the very words were speaking to her, guiding her through the process. Elias watched her with quiet patience, his presence a calm anchor in the whirlwind of thoughts swirling in her mind. He had not yet spoken again, giving Clara the space she needed to focus. She could feel the pull of the darkness, but it wasn't the same overwhelming, suffocating presence it had once been. It was quieter now, less insistent, as if it were waiting for her to decide its role in her life. The Keeper's path is one of mastery, not submission. Clara murmured softly, her lips reading the words aloud for the first time. To control the curse, one must first embrace the source of its power. The darkness is born of fear, but it can be wielded by those who stand firm in their understanding of it. As the words left her mouth, Clara felt something stir within her. The room around her seemed to hum, vibrating with an unseen energy, and the darkness inside her, though still present, shifted. It no longer felt like an enemy to be feared, but a force to be reckoned with, something that, if understood, could be shaped to her will. Clara's heart began to race as the realization hit her. She wasn't here to destroy the darkness. She was here to learn it, to wield it as the house's true keeper had done before her. She was here to become its master. She flipped through the book, finding instructions on how to focus her energy. The pages detailed rituals, ancient practices that would allow her to channel the darkness and light within her. There was a balance, always a balance. Too much light, and the darkness would overwhelm her. Too much darkness, and she would lose herself. The instructions were complex, but as she read, Clara's understanding began to deepen. The darkness inside her responded to her focus, the subtle energy within the book, drawing it out, coaxing it to bend to her will. A quiet power stirred beneath her skin like a pulse synchronized with her own heartbeat. The room seemed to grow colder as Clara's senses heightened. The light from the fire in the hearth flickered, casting long, dancing shadows across the walls. The air felt thick, charged with potential. And as Clara began the first of the rituals, she could feel the darkness inside her stretching, reaching out in response to the pull of her energy. The words in the book became clearer, the rhythm of the chant becoming almost instinctual. She could feel it, the darkness, but it wasn't the suffocating weight she had once felt. It was something else, a power that had been dormant, lying just beneath the surface of her being, waiting for her to tap into it. With every word she spoke, Clara could feel the energy shift moving through her, pooling in the center of her chest. Her breathing slowed as the darkness began to settle, not as an enemy, but as a part of her, like a tool waiting to be used. She wasn't afraid anymore. She was learning, shaping the power inside her into something that could protect, something that could help her fulfill her purpose. The temperature in the room dropped, the shadows growing longer as the dark energy reached its peak. But this time, Clara was ready. She reached inside herself, grasping the power and pulling it from the depths of her being, letting it fill the space around her. The room responded, the shadows now swirling with the intensity of the energy she had unlocked. Clara's body tingled as the force radiated from her, the darkness in perfect balance with the light that still burned brightly in her chest. The man, Elias, stood silently by the fire, watching her with a quiet approval in his eyes. He hadn't spoken a word, but Clara knew he was waiting for her to realize what had just happened. She had done it. She had controlled the darkness. As the energy settled, Clara's breathing returned to normal, and the room calmed once more. The shadows receded, and the temperature slowly rose back to its previous warmth. But Clara knew she was not the same. She was changed. She had embraced the power within her, and now she controlled it. It no longer ruled her. Elias finally spoke, his voice gentle yet firm. "You have done well, Clara. You have taken the first step toward mastering the darkness. But this is only the beginning. You must learn to wield it, to channel it, and to use it for what is right. Only then will you truly understand the path of the keeper." Clara nodded slowly, the weight of his words sinking in. There was still much to learn. The darkness was a tool, not a curse. She had control now, but she knew there would be moments of doubt, moments when the darkness would pull at her trying to take over. It was a constant struggle, a dance between the light and the shadow. "I'm ready," Clara said quietly, the words filled with resolve. She had embraced her fate. She would not let the darkness control her. She would control it. Elias smiled, his eyes warm with pride. "Good. The world needs a keeper who understands the power they wield. And you, Clara, will learn to protect the world from what lies in the shadows." The weight of the responsibility settled over Clara like a cloak. She wasn't just the keeper of a house anymore. She was the keeper of something much larger, the balance between light and dark, the force that shaped the world itself. Her journey had only just begun. There would be tests ahead, challenges she hadn't yet imagined. But Clara was ready. She had faced the darkness and come out stronger. And now she would face whatever came next, not as a victim of the curse, but as its master. The days that followed were filled with intense study, meditation, and practice. Elias had taken it upon himself to guide Clara through the ancient rituals of the keeper, teaching her how to channel and focus the darkness within her. The book she had been given became her constant companion, its pages filled with arcane knowledge and instructions on harnessing the power that pulsed inside her. Each day, Clara grew stronger. She learned how to reach deep within herself, to tap into the darkness that had once threatened to consume her, and instead use it as a tool. The power was subtle but powerful. It whispered to her, offering her control over the very elements of the world around her. With practice, she learned to bend the shadows to her will, to shift the air with a mere thought, to create protective barriers of light and dark. But with each new discovery came new challenges. Clara could feel the darkness stirring inside her at times, testing her, pushing her to give in. The shadows whispered to her in the quiet of the night, offering her power, urging her to embrace the darkness fully. She could feel the pull of it, the temptation to give in to its strength. But Clara refused to let it control her. She wasn't the keeper of the darkness, it was her power, and she would learn to wield it as she saw fit. Elias had told her that the path she was on would not be easy, that the darkness would always be a part of her, and that there would be moments when it would feel like she was losing control. But Clara was determined. She wouldn't let the darkness define her. She would choose her path. One morning, after a particularly intense training session, Clara stepped outside the small cottage, needing to clear her mind. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden light across the village. The air was cool, and the wind carried the scent of wildflowers from the meadow that stretched beyond the trees. She walked toward the edge of the village, her thoughts swirling as she took in the peaceful beauty of the world around her. But as she neared the forest, something caught her attention. A figure emerged from the trees, moving toward her with purpose. Clara froze. Her heart skipped a beat as she instinctively reached for the dagger at her side. But as the figure stepped into the clearing, she relaxed. It was a woman, tall and regal, with dark hair that fell in waves around her shoulders. Her eyes were sharp and calculating, but there was a certain warmth to her expression. She was dressed in a flowing cloak, her presence commanding yet calm. Clara recognized the woman instantly. Alana Clara whispered, a mix of relief and confusion flooding her chest. "What are you doing here?" "Alana," The woman who had once been a friend, a fellow traveler in the world of darkness, stepped forward, her gaze steady. "I knew you would come here," she said, her voice low but clear. I felt the shift in the air. The keeper has awoken. Clara looked at Alana, unsure of what to say. Alana had been a part of her journey before the one who had warned her about the dangers of the house. But Clara had never expected her to show up here in the village so soon after everything had settled. "How did you know?" Clara asked, still confused. Alana's lips curled into a small smile. "I have my ways, and I've been following your progress." She took a step closer, her eyes scanning Clara's face. "You've done well, Clara. You've embraced the darkness. But now comes the hardest part." Clara raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Alana's smile faded, slightly replaced by a look of serious concern. "The house wasn't the only thing that was tied to the darkness. There are others who have been touched by it, who have learned to control it. And they are not all as benevolent as you've become." Clara's heart sank. "What do you mean?" Alana stepped closer, lowering her voice. "There are others who were once keepers like you, but they gave in to the darkness. They became consumed by it. And now they are hunting you." The weight of Alana's words hit Clara like a physical blow. She had known deep down that there would be others like her keepers, those who had embraced the darkness. But the thought of them hunting her, it made her stomach churn. "Why?" Clara asked, her voice trembling. "Why are they coming after me?" Alana hesitated for a moment, her gaze searching Clara's face as if weighing how much to reveal. "Because you are the last of the true keepers," she said finally. "You have the potential to control the darkness, to use it in a way that no one else has. They fear you. They know what you could become if you learn to master it. And they won't let you take control without a fight." Clara's chest tightened. The darkness that had been her burden, her power, was now a target. There were others like her, others who had been consumed by it, and they were coming for her. "What do I do?" Clara whispered, fear creeping into her voice despite herself. Alana reached out, placing a hand gently on Clara's shoulder. "You must continue your training. You must learn to control the darkness, but you must also learn to protect yourself. You have the strength to face them, Clara. I know you do. But you must be ready. And you can't do it alone." Clara nodded slowly, her heart racing. She had faced the house. She had faced the curse. But this was something different. There were others, other keepers, who had fallen to the darkness, and now they were hunting her. Alana's presence was reassuring, but Clara knew that the path ahead would be fraught with danger. The darkness was never truly gone. It had just shifted, waiting for its next opportunity to strike. And now it was coming for her. "I'll be ready," Clara said, her voice strong. "I'll learn everything I need to. And I'll fight for the light." Alana gave her a sharp nod. "Good. Because the battle is only just beginning." With that, Clara turned to face the village, the weight of her destiny pressing down on her once more. She wasn't alone, but the journey ahead would be her hardest yet. The days following Alana's warning were filled with restless preparation. Clara couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness had only begun to stir. She had embraced it, yes, learned to control its pulse within her. But now the true test was at hand. The keepers who had fallen to the darkness, the ones who now hunted her, were no longer just whispers in the wind. They were real, and they would stop at nothing to see her fall, to see her join them in the eternal shadow. Elias had given her space to think, to process the weight of Alana's words. The old man had watched her with a quiet understanding, but even he seemed to sense the change in the air. The darkness had never been so close, so tangible. And now, it had come for her. Clara spent most of her time at the edge of the village near the forest, where she had first seen Alana. She meditated, practiced her rituals, and worked on strengthening her connection to the darkness, all while keeping an eye on the horizon. She couldn't afford to let her guard down. The shadows were closing in, and she had no idea when they would strike. The village, once a peaceful refuge, now felt more like a cage. The walls were no longer comforting. They felt confining. Clara knew it wasn't the village that had changed, it was her. She wasn't the same person who had arrived here just days ago. She had grown stronger, yes, but she had also become more aware of the dangers lurking in the corners of her mind, in the depths of the land around her. The darkness was never far from reach. It was on the 4th day since Alana's arrival that the first sign of trouble appeared. Clara was standing by the river, the cool water rushing past her as she practiced controlling the flow of the water, manipulating it with the darkness inside her. The air was thick with the hum of energy, the power of the house pulsing beneath her skin. She was so focused on the task at hand that she didn't notice the figure approaching until it was too late. A chill ran down her spine as a shadow fell over her, and when she turned, she saw the outline of a tall man standing at the edge of the river, his face obscured by the hood of his cloak. He stood silently, his presence heavy in the air. Clara felt her pulse quicken, the darkness inside her reacting to the new presence, the sense of danger filling her mind. "You are Clara." The man's voice was low, calm, and filled with a cold certainty. There was no question in his tone, just the fact of her name, of her existence. Clara took a step back, her hand instinctively reaching for the dagger at her side, but the man's gaze was locked on hers, intense and unyielding. "Who are you?" Clara demanded, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. The man didn't flinch. "I am what you will become if you do not listen," he said softly. "I am one of the keepers who fell to the darkness. I've been waiting for you, Clara, waiting for the moment you would emerge from the house and make your choice." Clara's heart skipped a beat. This was one of them, the keepers who had given in, the ones who had become something else, something terrible. "You're wrong," Clara said, her voice firmer now, trying to steady herself against the growing unease. "I will never become like you." The man's lips curled into a dark smile. "You already are, Clara. You can feel it, can't you? The darkness is within you. It is a part of you now. You cannot escape it. You are me." Clara's fingers tightened around the hilt of her dagger, but she didn't draw it. She had learned the hard way that violence wasn't always the answer, that the darkness was something that had to be fought with control, not raw force. "I'm not you," she said, her voice low but filled with conviction. "I will never let the darkness take me." The man took a step closer, his expression unchanging. "The darkness is not your enemy, Clara. It is your ally. You are stronger than you realize. The house has already marked you. You are the next keeper. You are destined for greatness, but only if you embrace the darkness fully. You cannot keep fighting it. You must become it." Clara's heart thudded in her chest. The pull of the darkness inside her twisted a familiar feeling, but now it seemed different, more powerful, as if the man's words were opening a door she had long kept shut. "No," Clara said, her voice steady but firm. "I will control it. I won't let it control me." The man's eyes narrowed, and the air around them seemed to grow heavier, thicker, as if the very land was holding its breath. "You have no choice, Clara. You are the keeper, and you will fall, just like the others." With a swift motion, he reached out his hand, passing through the air toward her. Clara felt the darkness inside her flare in response, but before she could react, a burst of energy rippled through the space, knocking her backward, sending her sprawling into the dirt. She gasped for air as the world around her spun. The power had been his. He had attacked her with the very thing she had learned to control. The darkness. It was far stronger than she had anticipated. Clara slowly pushed herself up, wiping the dirt from her hands, her eyes locked on the man before her. "I won't give in to you," she spat. The man didn't respond, but his smile only grew darker. "Then you will die fighting it." Before Clara could react, he vanished into the shadows, the air around her growing still again. But she could feel the weight of his presence lingering like a shadow in the back of her mind. The keepers were coming for her, and they would stop at nothing to make her one of them. Clara stood there for a long moment, her body trembling, not from the attack, but from the fear of what was to come. The darkness within her was not just a power, it was a force, a living, breathing thing that could destroy her if she wasn't careful. "I will control it." Clara whispered to herself, the words firm, determined. She was the keeper, and she would not let the darkness consume her. Clara stood there, her breath coming in ragged gasps, the remnants of the man's power still rippling through the air around her. The shadows he had summoned lingered like a fading echo, a reminder of the strength she still had yet to fully harness. The forest around her felt oddly quiet now, the usual sounds of rustling leaves and distant birds gone, replaced by a stillness that pressed in on her, suffocating and all-encompassing. Her heart pounded in her chest, but it wasn't from fear. It was from the realization of just how much power the darkness held over her, how easily it had been used against her, how little control she truly had. "I will control it," Clara repeated to herself, her voice quiet but steady. The words were a mantra, now something she could cling to, as she began to piece together the fragments of her resolve. The man, one of the fallen keepers, had tried to break her, tried to convince her to surrender to the darkness. He'd used the very power she was learning to control against her, and it had worked. For a moment, she had felt herself slip, felt the pull of the curse tightening around her, but she had fought it. She had stood her ground even when the power threatened to crush her. She had survived, and that meant she could continue. Clara wiped the sweat from her brow, straightening her posture as she refocused her thoughts. The keepers were after her, and they would come again. They wouldn't stop. But Clara had learned something important today. They underestimated her. They thought the darkness would overwhelm her, just like it had with all the others. But Clara wasn't like them. She wasn't just the keeper of the house. She was its master. As Clara turned back toward the village, her feet firm and steady beneath her, she felt the pull of the darkness inside her. It was strong, yes, but it no longer terrified her. She was its keeper now, its guardian, and she would bend it to her will. She was no longer just the victim of the curse. She was the one who controlled it. When Clara reached the cottage, Elias was waiting for her. His gaze was calm, but there was a flicker of concern in his eyes as he saw the determination in hers. He could sense what had happened, the shift that had taken place in her. Clara didn't need to explain. He already knew. "You've faced your first challenge," Elias said quietly, his voice steady like the foundation of the earth beneath their feet. "The darkness will always seek to test you, to bend you to its will. But remember this, you are the keeper now. It will only have power over you if you let it." Clara nodded, the weight of his words settling deep within her. She was no longer just the house's prisoner. She had taken control of the power it had given her, and with that power came responsibility. She couldn't forget that. The darkness was not just a tool, it was a force that could shape the world for better or for worse. And Clara had to choose what kind of keeper she would become. That night, Clara stood by the fire, the flames crackling softly, her mind racing. The battle with the Keeper had been a warning, a reminder of how easily things could slip out of her control. She couldn't afford to make the same mistake again. The darkness inside her was not her enemy. It was her strength. But she had to keep it in check. The book she had studied was on the table beside her, its pages worn and marked with her notes. She opened it again, flipping through the pages, and her eyes landed on a section about the final phase of the Keeper's power, the moment when the Keeper became the true master of the darkness. It wasn't about destroying it. It was about learning to balance it, to understand its full depth. Control, Clara whispered to herself, her fingers tracing the words. Balance between light and dark. She had felt the darkness rise within her, felt it call to her in moments of weakness. But she also knew that her light was what would guide her. She had to find a way to wield both together, but she wasn't ready yet. There was so much more to learn, and the Keepers, those who had fallen to the darkness, were still hunting her, still coming for her. Clara wasn't sure what came next, but she knew this much: she would be ready. The house had taught her everything it could, but it was now time for her to learn how to truly control the darkness and use it to protect the world, not destroy it. A knock on the door startled her from her thoughts. Clara stood, her heart pounding slightly as she approached. The door creaked open, and Alana stepped inside her presence, as calm and measured as ever. "I thought you might need some time," Alana said, her eyes scanning Clara's face for any sign of distress. "But it's time. You can't hide here forever." Clara looked at her for a long moment, understanding the weight of her words. Alana wasn't just talking about the village. She was talking about Clara's purpose. She had spent so long running, fighting the darkness inside her, trying to destroy it. But Alana was right. It was time to stop hiding. "I know," Clara said, her voice steady, "but I need to be sure. I need to be ready to face them." Alana nodded, stepping toward her. "You are ready, Clara. The darkness is no longer your enemy. It's your ally. You will find the balance. You have to. There are lives at stake." Clara swallowed hard, the weight of responsibility settling over her again. But this time it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a choice. Her choice. "Then let's go," Clara said, her voice steady with the knowledge of what she had to do. Alana's smile was small, but knowing, and together they walked out into the cool night, the shadows around them alive with the promise of what was to come. The road ahead would be difficult, but Clara was no longer afraid. She was the Keeper, and she would face whatever lay ahead with the strength she had learned to wield. She was ready. The night was colder than Clara had expected, and the wind carried a sharp bite as it swept through the village. She pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders, her breath visible in the cold air. Alana walked beside her, her pace steady, but Clara could sense the urgency in the way she moved. They were headed toward the forest, deeper into the wilds beyond the village where the shadows were thickest. It was there that Clara would face her next trial. The silence between them was comfortable, but tense. Clara could feel the weight of Alana's presence beside her. There was something about the older woman that grounded her, something familiar. She was no stranger to the darkness, and though Clara had not been able to see the full extent of her journey, she trusted Alana to guide her. The path ahead was unfamiliar. They had crossed the boundary of the village and now walked into a wilderness that had not felt the touch of civilization for centuries. The trees around them were tall and twisted, their branches stretching toward the sky like skeletal fingers. The darkness was alive here, pressing in on all sides, but Clara didn't feel the panic she had once felt in the house. Instead, she felt a deep sense of purpose. "We're close," Alana murmured, her voice low yet steady. "The others are not far behind." Clara nodded. She didn't need to ask who the others were. The Keepers who had fallen. the ones who would stop at nothing to claim her, to bring her into the fold. They were coming, and Clara could feel the darkness stirring inside her, as if it were aware of their presence. They reached a clearing, and Alana stopped. Clara paused beside her, scanning the area. The forest stretched endlessly on all sides, the trees, a wall of shadow. But in the center of the clearing stood a stone structure, half buried in vines, but still intact. The ancient stones seemed to pulse with energy, an almost palpable hum in the air around them. Clara could feel the power here, old and strong, a remnant of something long forgotten. "This is where they meet," Alana said softly. "The keepers, the ones who embraced the darkness completely. They come here to gather their strength to test those who have learned to control the power." Clara swallowed hard. "What do they want from me?" Alana's gaze softened, a hint of sadness in her eyes. "They want to bring you into their fold. They want you to surrender to the darkness, to become what they are. But Clara, you don't have to do that. You are stronger than they are." Clara clenched her fists, the familiar weight of the darkness inside her pressing against her skin. She knew what she had to do. She couldn't allow herself to be consumed by what they had become. She had to fight. She would fight. Just as she was about to speak, the air around them shifted. The shadows seemed to thicken to breathe, and the temperature dropped. A chill ran through her, but she didn't move. She stood her ground, her eyes scanning the clearing as she felt the presence of others approaching. Alana stepped closer to Clara, her voice a low whisper. "Stay calm. They're here." Clara didn't need to be told twice. She could feel them now, as if they were everywhere, surrounding them in the dark, their presence hanging like a storm cloud ready to burst. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end as she turned toward the shadows, her heart racing. A figure stepped forward from the darkness, its form tall and imposing, cloaked in black. The man's face was hidden by a hood, but his presence radiated power. Clara could feel the darkness he carried within him, thick and suffocating. He was one of them. Another figure appeared beside him, this one, a woman, her eyes glowing faintly in the dark. The light seemed to bend around her, making the shadows dance. She stepped forward, and Clara could feel the air shift with each movement. The first man spoke, his voice deep and cold. Clara. Her name hung in the air, heavy with expectation. She didn't flinch. She met his gaze with steady resolve. "You're the last of the keepers," he continued. "The house is gone, and yet you remain. You carry its power with you. You are destined to join us to embrace what the others could not." Clara's fists clenched tighter, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew what he wanted. He wanted her to surrender, to become a vessel for the darkness. But she couldn't not after everything she had fought for. "I will never be like you." Clara said, her voice firm, unwavering. "I will not give in." The man's eyes glinted beneath his hood, a sharp, calculating gaze. "You don't have a choice." His voice dropped to a low growl. "The darkness will consume you, just as it has consumed us. You cannot fight what you are. You cannot run from it." Clara stood her ground. The darkness inside her surged in response, but she refused to let it control her. She was stronger than it. She had to be. "I control the darkness," Clara said through gritted teeth. "It doesn't control me." The man let out a low, dark laugh. "You think you can control it? You are a fool. The house is part of you now. It always has been." The woman beside him stepped forward, her eyes glowing brighter now. "You will learn, Clara. In time, you will understand. But until then, we will not allow you to stand in our way." Before Clara could react, the ground beneath her feet shifted. The shadows around her twisted, coiling like serpents, reaching toward her, pulling at her. The darkness tried to overwhelm her, to consume her like it had with the others. But Clara stood tall. her breath steady, her mind focused. She had the power. She wouldn't let it control her. With a shout, she raised her hands, and the light inside her flared to life. It was bright, blinding, pushing back the darkness like a force of nature. The shadows recoiled, shrieking as they were driven away, but Clara kept the light steady, her mind firm. The man and the woman stepped back, their eyes narrowing in frustration. "You will regret this," the man spat. "The darkness always finds a way." Clara didn't flinch. She was the keeper now, and she would decide what came next. Not today. The darkness recoiled, and with that they vanished back into the shadows, leaving Clara standing in the center of the clearing, her heart pounding in her chest. "They'll come again," Alana said softly, stepping up beside Clara. "But now you know you have the strength to face them." Clara nodded, her gaze fixed on the spot where the keepers had disappeared. She wasn't just the keeper of the house. She was the keeper of her own destiny, and she would fight to protect it. The battle was just beginning. The days that followed the confrontation in the clearing felt like a quiet storm, heavy with anticipation. Clara couldn't shake the images of the keepers, those who had fallen to the darkness, vanishing into the shadows. She had pushed them back, yes, but their words echoed in her mind. The darkness always finds a way. It was true. The darkness inside her, the curse of the house, would never be gone completely. She could feel it within her, a constant presence, a force that could rise at any moment if she let it. But she had learned something powerful in that moment. She didn't have to be afraid of it. She didn't have to let it consume her. Clara spent hours practicing each day, pushing herself further, learning to wield the power inside her. She trained with the rituals in the book, drawing on the energy around her, commanding the darkness with an increasing ease. But even as she grew stronger, a part of her always remained vigilant. The keepers were out there, and they would come again. They would test her. They would try to break her. It was Alana who found her one morning sitting by the fire in the cottage, her eyes focused on the flames. Clara had been deep in concentration, practicing a technique that allowed her to manipulate the light and dark within her, to create a barrier of energy, both protective and destructive. It was difficult, and it required every ounce of her focus, but it felt right. The darkness wasn't something to destroy, it was something to understand, to command. "You're ready?" Alana said, her voice low, but filled with certainty. Clara looked up, surprised at the certainty in Alana's tone. "What do you mean?" Alana smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. "I've watched you train. You've learned to control the darkness within you. You've learned to harness it. You're not the same person who came to us weeks ago. You've come a long way, Clara." Clara hesitated, her fingers brushing against the edges of the book in her lap. "I don't feel ready," she admitted quietly. "The keepers will come again. I can feel it. And I don't know if I'm strong enough to face them." Alana sat down beside her, her gaze gentle. "You are ready. I can feel the strength inside you. You've faced the darkness within yourself, and you've come out stronger for it. You will face them, and you will defeat them." Clara's heart pounded in her chest as Alana's words sank in. The fear that had been gnawing at her for days seemed to lose its hold. She had trained, yes. She had learned how to control the power within her. But what if it wasn't enough? What if the keepers were stronger than she could handle? Alana reached out, placing a hand on Clara's shoulder. "Fear is a part of the path, Clara. But you are not alone. We will face this together." Clara nodded slowly, trying to steady her breath. There was truth in Alana's words. She wasn't alone, not anymore. She had the darkness, yes, but she also had the light inside her. She had the strength to control it, to protect what she loved. Suddenly, the wind outside howled and Clara stood up, her senses on high alert. She could feel it just like before, the pull of someone drawing near. "They're here," Clara whispered, her pulse quickening. Alana stood beside her, her eyes hardening with resolve. "Stay focused. We've prepared for this moment." Clara's mind raced as she felt the pressure of the power inside her. She could feel it like a storm gathering just beneath her skin. She wasn't afraid anymore. The darkness was hers to control. But she had to be careful. She couldn't let it consume her. The door to the cottage creaked open, and Clara turned toward it, her body tense, ready for whatever was about to come. A figure appeared in the doorway, tall and cloaked, his face hidden in shadow. The air seemed to grow colder, the presence of the man like a suffocating fog in the small room. Clara's heart skipped a beat. She knew this man. She could feel his power, just like the man who had confronted her in the clearing. He was one of them, the fallen keepers. And he had come for her. "I've come for you, Clara." The man said, his voice smooth, but carrying an undertone of malice. "The darkness calls to you. You've been chosen. Join us, and you will understand your true purpose." Clara took a step forward, her eyes narrowing. "I've already chosen," she said, her voice steady but filled with defiance. "I will not become like you." The man chuckled darkly, stepping into the room. His eyes glinted beneath his hood, and the air around them seemed to grow thicker, heavier. "You have no choice, Clara. The darkness is part of you now. You cannot escape what you are." Clara could feel the power within her stir, the darkness reacting to the man's words, the challenge in his voice. But this time, it wasn't the suffocating force that had once controlled her. This time, it was her power, and she wasn't afraid of it anymore. "I am the keeper," Clara said, her voice firm, steady. "But I will not be what you've become. I will use the darkness to protect the world, not destroy it." The man's smile faltered, his eyes darkening with anger. "You are foolish, Clara. The darkness is not something you can control. It will consume you just like it consumed the others." Clara stepped forward, her hands raised, and the light inside her flared, the power radiating from her in a bright, blinding burst. The shadows recoiled as the light pushed them back, a surge of strength that made her feel like she could take on the world. The man staggered back, his face contorting with frustration. "You're not ready," he hissed, his voice trembling with rage. "You cannot defeat me." "I already have," Clara said, her voice strong, unwavering. "And I will continue to fight. I will never give in to the darkness." The man snarled, his form shifting in the shadows, but Clara's light grew brighter, pushing back against him. He let out a growl of frustration, his form flickering, and then with a final burst of dark energy, he vanished into the shadows, retreating from the light Clara had summoned. Clara stood there, her chest rising and falling with the intensity of the moment. The darkness had tried to take her again, but she had resisted. She had won, and with each victory, she grew stronger. Alana stepped up beside her, her eyes filled with pride. "You did it," she said softly. "You fought back. You controlled the darkness." Clara took a deep breath, the weight of the moment settling in. The keepers were coming for her, but she was ready. She was the keeper now, and she would face whatever came next, not as a victim, but as its master. The wind howled through the trees, a restless force that seemed to mirror the turmoil inside Clara. She stood in the clearing, where the dark figure had vanished, the taste of victory still fresh in her mouth. But she knew it wasn't over. The darkness wasn't something that could be destroyed with a single strike. It wasn't a battle that could be won in one moment. This was the beginning of a war that would rage inside her, a war between light and shadow, between control and chaos. Alana stood beside Clara, her eyes watchful, knowing what was coming next. The keepers, the fallen ones, would not retreat so easily. They would come again, and next time they would not underestimate Clara. "They'll be back," Clara said, her voice steady but heavy with realization. "I can feel it. The darkness inside me is calling to them. They want me to join them." Alana nodded, her expression hardening. "They'll try to break you. But remember this, Clara. You are not like them. You have a strength they never had. You are the keeper, yes, but you are different. You've chosen to control the darkness, not let it consume you." Clara clenched her fists at her sides. The power that swirled within her, the darkness that had once terrified her, now pulsed with a steady rhythm. She had learned to harness it, but with each passing day, the temptation to let it consume her became harder to resist. The shadows whispered to her in her dreams, promising power, offering freedom from the pain and the fear. But Clara had made her choice. She would not fall like the others had. She wouldn't let the darkness take her. She wouldn't be their puppet. "I won't be like them," Clara said, her voice firm, her resolve unshakable. "I won't give in. I'll fight until the end." Alana studied her for a moment, and then slowly nodded. "Good. That's the only way." The wind shifted again, a reminder of how close the next confrontation might be. Clara looked back toward the village, feeling the weight of her responsibility settle over her. She wasn't just the keeper of the house anymore. She was the keeper of something much greater. She had a power that could shape the world for better or for worse. And she had to decide how to use it. The darkness inside her was strong, but it wasn't all-consuming. It was a part of her, just as the light within her was. She had learned how to channel both, how to balance them. But every day she would be tested. The keepers would not stop until they had either converted her to their side or destroyed her completely. Clara took a deep breath and turned back to Alana, her gaze steady. "What's next?" Alana looked at her for a long moment, as if measuring her readiness. "We move forward. The keepers are gathering strength, but so are you. The house is no longer a threat, but the darkness it released into the world still remains. You must learn to fight it, not just for yourself, but for everyone else who is vulnerable to it." Clara nodded slowly, the weight of the task at hand settling in her chest. The darkness was spreading, and she could feel it, its tendrils reaching out into the world. It had touched her, changed her. And now, it was her duty to protect those who were still unaware of its power. The path ahead would not be easy. Clara knew that. But she was no longer afraid. She had faced the darkness inside her and come out stronger. She had the power to control it. And she would use it to protect the world, to stop the keepers from spreading their twisted vision of what the darkness could do. Clara glanced toward the horizon, her eyes narrowing as she focused on what lay ahead. The keepers were out there waiting for the right moment to strike. But she was ready. She wouldn't run from them. She wouldn't hide. She was the keeper now, and the world would see that she could control the darkness not as a force to be feared, but as a power to protect the world from what lurked in the shadows. Alana placed a hand on her shoulder, the gesture reassuring but firm. "You've come far, Clara, but the true test is yet to come. We'll face it together." Clara nodded, determination flooding through her. She wasn't alone. She had allies, and she had herself. She would not be swayed by the darkness. She would be the keeper the world needed. And with every step she took, she would grow stronger. The keepers might come again. They might try to break her, to turn her to their side. But Clara had already made her choice. She would not fall. "Let them come," Clara said, her voice steady and full of fire. "I'll be ready." And with that, Clara turned, stepping into the unknown, knowing that the road ahead would be long and filled with challenges. But she was no longer afraid. She was the keeper, and she would protect the world from the darkness, no matter the cost. Clara's journey had brought her far from the house that had once trapped her, but the road ahead was no less treacherous. She had learned to control the darkness inside her, but that control would constantly be tested. The keepers, the fallen ones, were still out there, waiting for her to slip to falter. But Clara no longer feared the shadows. She had faced them and emerged stronger. She was ready. The days turned into weeks, and the world around her continued on its path. The village, though small and quiet, had become her refuge. It was a place where she could rest, recover, and sharpen her skills. But it was also a reminder of what she was fighting for the people she wanted to protect. The darkness, though ever present within her, was no longer something she ran from. It was a part of her now, and she would use it to shield the world from what sought to destroy it. One evening, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of red and orange, Clara stood at the edge of the forest, watching the horizon. Her thoughts were heavy. The keepers had not attacked again, but she knew it was only a matter of time before they made their move. They wouldn't give up easily. But Clara had a plan. She had spent the last few weeks preparing herself, not just for the keepers, but for the possibility of a world that would never truly be free from the curse of the house. She had been chosen for this path, and now it was her responsibility to ensure that it would not fall into darkness again. A soft rustling behind her broke her reverie, and Clara turned to see Alana approaching. The older woman's face was serious, but there was a warmth in her eyes that Clara had come to trust. She had been a guiding force for Clara since the beginning of her journey, and Clara knew she was ready for the next phase. "They're coming, aren't they?" Clara asked quietly, not needing to elaborate further. Alana nodded, her expression unwavering. "They will come for you, and you will be ready. But remember, Clara, the darkness is not just a weapon. It is part of the world, part of you." Clara looked down at her hands, feeling the power coursing through her. The darkness was within her, yes, but it was not the same as it had been in the house. It wasn't an enemy anymore. It was something she had made her own, something she would wield with purpose. "I'm ready," Clara said, her voice filled with conviction. "I'll protect this world no matter what." Alana's smile was small but proud. "Then we go together. There is much to be done. The darkness you carry has already begun to spread, but there is more to be done. The keepers are not the only threat. There are others who would see the world consumed by shadows, by the same power you wield, and they will come for you too." Clara straightened her gaze, hardening. "Then let them come. I won't run. Not from them, not from anything." Alana stepped closer, placing a hand on Clara's shoulder. "That's the spirit of a true keeper. You've learned well, Clara. Now it's time to lead." The weight of her words settled over Clara, but instead of burdening her, it fueled her resolve. She was ready to face whatever lay ahead, and she would fight with everything she had. The darkness was hers to command, not her enemy, and she would use it to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The air grew still around them, the quiet of the forest broken only by the sound of the wind rustling through the leaves. For a moment, Clara allowed herself to close her eyes, letting the warmth of the sun sink into her skin. She was not just the keeper of the house. She was the keeper of the world. The darkness would never truly leave her, but neither would the light. She was the balance. She was the protector, and she would stand against whatever came for her. "Let's go," Clara said, her voice strong, unwavering. "It's time." And with that, the two women turned, stepping away from the edge of the forest and into the unknown, ready for whatever trials awaited them. The keepers would come, but Clara would not be the same woman they had once tried to break. She had learned, she had grown, and now she would lead the fight against the darkness. The road ahead was uncertain, but Clara knew one thing: she was the keeper, and she would shape her destiny.